The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Cena.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Cena.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It's Thursday, January 24th, 2019, and this is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We're broadcasting live after a brief technical delay in the steps away from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On today's program, Brian Mier of Brazil Wire, the descent of Brazil into a fascist mafia state and its connection to the ongoing coup in Venezuela. Then Eva Golinger, former legal advisor to Hugo Chavez, is going to be speaking with us about what's happening on the ground now. Turkey, China, Russia reject the U.S. Canadian-backed move to recognize another president and militarily threaten a sovereign government. With the support of many, many Democrats and the silence of others, Mexico and Uruguay and the Vatican are looking to negotiate some type of peace arrangement as we are mid-coup attempt in Venezuela. Ro Khanna, honorable exception, and a few others. We'll get to that and more. Trump's going to delay his State of the Union address. More relaxing next Tuesday for those of us in this studio. Senator Cory Gardner of Colorado, he's saying he'll vote on a Democratic deal to open the government. Furloughed workers are staging sit-ins outside of senators' offices, and 12 have been arrested. Where's the arrest warrant for Mitch McConnell, who could end this at any time he wanted? And where are the nationwide strikes we need over this and actually a whole lot of other things? Adam Schiff and Maxine Waters are looking to do a joint investigation into Deutsche Bank, which is an important bank to keep track of for all Trump-related irregularities. Well, maybe not all. Jesus Christ. I don't want to think about all Trump-related irregularities. The Pacific Standard is reporting that Trump is set to cancel a 50-year-old environmental law. And air traffic control union leaders warn of unprecedented safety risks as the shutdown continues. Strike now, all that. And much, much more on the Majority Report. Folks, I don't know what that problem was. I think we're good to go now, but we're going to have a shortened opening block. Though, actually, we can play this clip because I told Brian to give me an extra 5 minutes. So, actually, I guess we're only at 12:16. Sometimes enlightenment comes from unlikely sources. A lot of people beef with Chris Cuomo. I actually think Chris Cuomo, for what it's worth, is not. I mean, this is a network that has Jake Tapper, who is consistently outdoing himself in whack. And a whole, cavalcade of guests that I'm not particularly impressed by. But here is Chris Cuomo, of all people. First, he's parlaying some right-wing asshole. What is the guy's name? Do we even want to say? Steve Cortez. I don't even know this guy. They're talking about the border. And, of course, completely artificial, fake crisis to build on people's racial paranoias. It signifies absolutely nothing other than the suffering created by this policy. Cuomo is parlaying that, and first he goes in a brilliant direction. It was like, actually, I could tell you in a national emergency we could deal with poverty. Boom. Then that, of course, sends off the Pavlovian response in all of these idiots, which is do something about poverty. What about Venezuela? And then Chris Cuomo, as a shocked Paul Begala looks on, has a more effective answer on Venezuela than like over 90% of professional Democrats I see in media. Let's check this out.
No, he never said it's a
Crime
panacea.
will fall.
It will fall. That doesn't mean crime will be eliminated. It will fall. And look, here's the thing about illegal alien crime. You're right. We have a lot of crime in the United States, and there's ways we can and should address that. But illegal alien crime is 100% preventable in every single case. We just had over the weekend the arrest of an illegal alien who killed an elderly 80-year-old couple in Nevada. I mean, this is very real-world pain that these people have to deal with. One of the tools to fight that kind of illegality and that kind of pain is a border
You
wall.
apply
That's what
that
law enforcement tells
rationale
us they
to
need.
no other type of crime prevention in this country. The idea that something's 100% you know what's 100% preventable? Poverty. You know what's 100% preventable? Hunger in the richest country in the world. No urgency like that on those problems, though. You get people jobs.
How is poverty 100% preventable? Because are you going to say socialism?
You bring the economy up the way you said
take a
you were
look at
going
Venezuela.
Venezuela. Because that's a great strategy you got going there, right? You starve these countries of support, then you create environments on the ground where they can blow up, and then you stand back and watch them burn. What are we going to do there now? What are we going to do in the triangle if he cuts aid to them? Come on, Steve.
Look, blaming the United States for the problems of Central America.
I'm not doing that. Don't spin me on my own show. I'm saying that cutting funding will only make it worse.
What I love about that clip is there's no analysis I need to do around it. He nailed all of it. The only thing I would add is I do blame U.S. foreign policy for a great deal of problems in Latin America. Folks, big corporations are getting rich by selling your data. And Congress has completely failed to save net neutrality or protect protect your privacy online. Now, internet providers and mobile carriers like Comcast and Verizon are free to restrict websites, spy on your online activity, or sell your browsing history to advertisers. But with one click, ExpressVPN shields your online activity from internet and mobile providers. ExpressVPN has easy-to-use apps that run seamlessly in the background of your computer, phone, and tablet. ExpressVPN secures and anonymizes your internet browsing by encrypting your data and hiding your public IP address. Get VPN protection for less than $7 a month. ExpressVPN rated the #1 VPN service by TechRadar and comes with a 30-day back money guarantee. If you ever use public Wi-Fi and want to keep hackers and spies from seeing your data, ExpressVPN is the solution. As I always say with this service, which is indispensable, you got to protect yourselves. It was incredibly easy to install, which is my sort of basic make or break with any technology. Seamless, easy to install, and no way changes your experience, but just protects you somewhat from this stalker economy of Silicon Valley. To take back your internet privacy today and find out how you can get 3 months free, go to expressvpn.com/majority. That's expressvpn.com/majority for 3 months free with a 1-year package. Visit expressvpn.com/majority to learn more. We'll be right back with Brian Mier. Oh, Jesus Christ. When you play the sound drops during the break, it's like there's no escape. It's like, can I have 1 minute of my life before I go on air where I talk with my friend Brian Mier, where I don't have to be reminded that Mark Zuckerberg exists? Matt, Jesus Christ.
It doesn't stop.
It never stops. Joining us now is Brian Mier. He is the co-editor of Brazil Wire. You can also find his work at Telesur and any other reputable outlet dealing with Latin America. Brian, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So, Brian, we've been talking for a long time on both the Majority Report and the Michael Brooks Show. People can see you in a variety of outlets, both telling the actual trajectory, at least the modern trajectory of how we got where we are in Brazil today, which obviously has ramifications for what's happening right now in Venezuela with this attempted coup, and across really, I would say, kind of east-west, north-south politics. And I want you to actually do that again for us briefly, just to reset. Could you get us to really the basically the rise and successes of Lula and the Workers' Party, and Dilma and the imprisonment of Lula, and how these forces from U.S. foreign policymakers, Wall Street, Sergio Moro, converged to bring a current and it looks like faltering fascist government into power in Brazil?
Okay, well, in honor of the failed coup attempt that's underway in Venezuela right now, I will use petroleum as the narrative thread in this version of the story. Okay? Mm-hmm. So basically, there was a dictatorship in Brazil until 1985. Despite petroleum interests being behind the dictatorship, the military never privatized Brazil's state petroleum company. Then around 2006, after Lula had been in power for a couple of years, Brazil discovered some of the world's largest offshore petroleum reserves and announced that its state petroleum company, Petrobras, had developed very cheap technology and efficient technology for extracting deep water offshore petroleum reserves, right? At this point, we know from Edward Snowden. Can you hear the thunder that's going on? It's pouring out here.
We definitely can hear the thunder. This is it adds the prophetic resonance of your. Yeah, this is good. It's like Hebrew prophets.
I guess I don't have to say then that there's dark clouds hanging over South American democracy today.
Right. You do not. Quite literally,
okay.
Right? Yeah.
So there we go again. All right. So basically at this point we know that the NSA started spying on Petrobras Petroleum Company. Suddenly Brazil was positioned to be transformed into one of the world's leading petroleum producers. Mm-hmm. Okay? Now this had ramifications because as we know, as we can see by what's going on in Venezuela right now, when a country gets too much petroleum, the United States starts getting very interested. And so we know through leaked State Department cables from 2009 that the U.S. government started engaging in a partnership ostensibly to fight corruption in Brazil with a local public prosecutor's office in the city of Curitiba in southern Brazil, led by a man named Sergio Moro. Okay, so this led to this huge anti-corruption investigation called Lava Jato, or Operation Car Wash in English, alleging that millions of dollars had been embezzled through Petrobras, some newspapers calling it the biggest scandal of all times, and then it bled into a bunch of other major Brazilian industries, many of which had big holdings in the United States, like JBS Meatpacking Company, which bought Swift a couple of years ago, like Odebrecht Construction Company. Here we go again. Odebrecht, thunder.
Right.
Okay, so anyway, so they started these investigations. Not to say that there wasn't corruption, wasn't a lot of corruption. In fact, the oil industry, the petroleum industry, is one of the 5 biggest 5 most corrupt industries in the world.
Right.
By accounts. Like it's like the drug industry, like the pesticide industry. If you scratch under the surface in any petroleum company, you're going to find all kinds of corruption.
Right.
Look at Shell, for example, in Nigeria, bragging about placing cabinet ministers, things like that. So you're not okay. So anyway, despite the fact that they were unable to prove any links between Dilma Rousseff and corruption in Petrobras, it was used as an excuse to commit character assassination against her in the media and in the U.S. media. In the New York Times, during the week before the 2014 re-elections, or when she ran for re-election in 2014, the New York Times connected her to corruption in Petrobras, like in 7 different moments in articles leading up to the election. John Oliver connected her to corruption in Petrobras Petroleum Company on his show, and basically none of that was they couldn't ever find any evidence of this. So she was impeached on a budget technicality. She was removed from office on a technicality by a Congress that, most of the members of Congress had corruption charges open against them for other things anyway, including the head of Congress at the time is now in jail for stealing tens of millions of dollars. So she was thrown out. Then they started moving against Lula once again, constantly driving the idea that he was involved in corruption with Petrobras Petroleum Company. In fact, The Guardian, on the day Lula was arrested, lied about this and said that his corruption charges were connected to $49 million or something of embezzlement in Petrobras Petroleum Company, which Sergio Moro himself said in the sentence was absolutely not the case. They couldn't find any evidence of this. So you see in this ongoing process in which they removed a democratically elected leader on a budget technicality that was legalized a week after she left office, and then arrested the leading candidate in the 2018 presidential elections after spending years publicly associating him with corruption in the petroleum industry, which didn't exist. We get to this point where the far right-wing government of Jair Bolsonaro was able to take power, and he appointed the man who was the prosecutor and the judge in the charges against Lula as his justice minister. Or in other words, the same man who removed Lula from the elections when he was leading with double the popularity of any other contender got a present in return for that. And now he's working to protect Bolsonaro's son against corruption charges. So and to be clear, when you said legalize it a week after, what just to spell it out for a second, the budget technicality, and to be clear, everybody should go look this up. I mean, literally, they removed Dilma Rousseff for essentially the equivalent of if Obama gave like some type of budget projection score that you could say, oh, that wasn't, no, there's actually more in the ag department than he's saying, right? Like if Republicans removed Obama for a bad CBO score, it's essentially what we're talking about. And then the maneuver that was technically illegal that they used, I guessed, they specifically made legal a week after they used it to remove her from office. So, and I want to touch though on this theme of corruption, because it's going to get us into the genuinely jaw-dropping, corruption allegations that are now swirling around the Bolsonaro operation and potential stories that connecting them to a cartel gang that assassinated Marielle Franco. But I think, more on a bigger picture, this use of corruption politics has been the friend of fascism across the globe. Donald Trump ran a generic drain the swamp campaign. In India, Narendra Modi talked constantly of corruption. And it spells out a couple of things. So one, it's the enormous double standards. Look, if in Venezuela or Nicaragua, which again, I think we could be intellectually honest, there's problems in these places, and we still, of course, obviously oppose U.S. interference.
But if there was a left-wing government that was perceived of as anti-United States, and the leading contender was thrown in jail by a guy who then became on spurious charges that could never be spelled out or verified, and then became justice minister in a left-wing government that he put into place because he took a internationally recognized icon and put him into solitary confinement. That would be, well, I mean, as big as any international story is in the United States, but it would cause quite a huff here, and there'd be a lot of official sounding statements from, the State Department and so on, right? So there's that obvious contradiction. Then there's the fact that these governments, and we're going to get into Bolsonaro in a second, have their own, just jaw-dropping corruption allegations. And then there's the bigger context of how are we even defining corruption anyways? I mean, okay, you discover kickbacks at an oil company. As you said, I mean, you'll discover that anywhere that there's an oil business, maybe the least of which in Norway, maybe. I mean, right? But what is Bolsonaro appointing a set of ministers that are going to privatize the country and sell it off to Wall Street and Canadian logging firms? Like, that's not corruption? Anyways, I just want to, take it in any direction you want to go in, but I just think it's very important that these generic terms like corruption that are thrown around and are always leveraged in the modern context by the far right be really interrogated, because people constantly like, oh, well, corruption's bad, And we got to be really clear about what the hell we're exactly talking about here.
Yeah, I feel like corruption has become a mind-stopping cliche.
Right.
The way that the media uses it. You hear the word and your mind stops functioning.
Right.
Oh, he was corrupt.
Oh, Brian. I think we lost Brian. No, we're reconnecting. Little real-time. Little real.
Heck of a thunderstorm.
Heck of a thunderstorm.
It's very apocalyptic today,
folks. It is super apocalyptic.
Folks.
It's rainy here, too. All right, let me just try him right back. See, and then if not, I might have to call him on a landline. Not good, folks. Not good, folks. Sorry about this. Sorry for all the tech problems, but you can't fight with nature.
Use some danarchy.
Or the apocalypse. All right, let's drop some danarchy. Of course. Always blame the Fash. All right, I gotta get his. I gotta get a landline for him.
Hey everyone, we are live from my backyard where I am smoking a brisket and some ribs. I'm making meats now. Smoking these meats here. Our little meat smoking. It's smoking. So I'm the meat chef. Yeah, someone asked me, do I smoke meat? Smoking meat, smoking these meats. Smoking meats earlier in the day. Smoking these meats, just set the charcoal up and you set the wood chips up, and then smoking meats, grilling meats, good smoky flavor. Smoke a brisket for like 12 hours. You smoke lemon chicken, smoke salmon, you'll love it. Bison sirloin, ribs and sausage, so I'm looking forward to that. Today we got a brisket on the big guy, and some pork ribs on the green egg. Meat like a brisket. I got ribs in there. Finishing off the brisket and the ribs. And I'm just sitting in our backyard, finishing off this brisket and these ribs. But hopefully for Canadian Thanksgiving, you get to eat a lot of brisket and ribs. How many of you guys are eating brisket and ribs tonight? Brisket and ribs. They taste doubly better when you hunted the animal yourself. So what are you guys making for dinner? Brisket and ribs, I hope. delicious. Brisket and rib. The ribs and the brisket need to be eaten. I want to try your brisket. I want to try my brisket. It's a pretty tough cut of meat. The ribs and the brisket. Are you excited to have a rib tonight? I want my baby back ribs. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Sweet Baby Ray's barbecue sauce. That is going on the ribs. Sweet Baby Ray. Sweet Baby Ray's or Sweet Baby Ray's? Sweet Baby Ray's is very good. Sweet Baby Ray's. Sweet Baby Ray's. We have just applied the Sweet Baby Ray's. Sweet Baby Ray's. Sweet Baby Ray's. Maybe throw some Sweet Baby Ray's on the ribs and take it from there. She's waiting for her ribs. I mean, she knows what's coming, and Sweet Baby Ray's. So that's pretty good. Yeah. Who doesn't like ribs? Everyone likes ribs. Everyone likes ribs.
Excuse me, B.
Yeah, no, this is what Facebook Live is for. Just hanging out while you're sitting in your backyard, waiting for your brisket and your ribs to finish smoking. Are you guys ready? Can you guys check this out? This is, oh yeah, that's, oh wow, look at that. Pretty good. We're looking pretty good on the
Hey, folks, sorry about that. We cannot get back through to Brian. I know that the storm is really serious there. That really sucks. Bad tech karma today. We'll see if we can get Eva on the line in 10 minutes. But I do want to say, yeah, just in a second. But I just want to finish what was coming out of Brazil just for a minute. So, oh, okay, let me try. This is Brian. I'll try. Hey, Brian, are you there?
Yeah, hey, sorry, man.
Hey.
It really, when
No
it
worries.
rains in Sao Paulo, it really rains.
No worries. I'm glad you're back. You were just, you know what, let's just take it from where you were. We have about another 10 minutes. You were saying corruption as a thought-stopping cliche. Please go from there.
It's a mind-stopping cliche. I feel like basically, since the United States doesn't have any more moral authority on human rights issues, even though it still tries to use them as excuses for justified interventions, it has to use other justifications to take down governments that don't completely suck up to all of their demands. You know, so corruption is an easy thing to accuse people of. Mussolini loved to accuse leftists of being corrupt. It's a constant theme. Corruption was a theme used to try and take down the left in Brazil leading up to the 1964 military coup. So that's why I think it's used so much. But I think you have to look at what's really going on when these charges come about and the way that the media is using them. Because in the case of Lula, there was never any material evidence presented against him, and they couldn't even create a formal charge. He was charged with undetermined acts of corruption based on one plea bargain testimony from a man who had already been jailed and received huge reduction of his sentence and transfer to house arrest and partial retention of millions of dollars in assets for basically delivering the script that Sergio Moro could use to put him in jail. You know, and then you compare that to the charges against Jair Bolsonaro's son.
Well, let's spell those out.
You know,
what are the charges against Jair Bolsonaro's son, and what has been happening in terms of the revelations? I mean, we already know that Jair Bolsonaro is a far-right, bigoted autocrat, client of U.S. interests. But in the past couple of weeks, it's been just the speed at which some of these incredibly serious corruption allegations, particularly around his son, have come out. Spell those out for us. What's happening here? And then, of course, how is this great crusader against corruption, Sergio Moro, who created Lula as a political prisoner and now serves in this government, what's he have to say about all this? I'm assuming he's resigning in protest.
Yeah, right. Of course not. But, okay, so in Rio de Janeiro, historically large swaths of the city have been controlled by organized crime groups, by drug gangs. In the early 2000s, groups of off-duty or retired or former police officers got together to try and drive the drug dealers out of one favela on the west side of the city called Rio das Pedras. And it's what started out of kind of like noble goal of like making the neighborhood safer and stuff, quickly turned into this kind of extortion gang that operates on the same principles like as the mafia. They charge protection money from local businesses, and they wreak out very brutal justice in their neighborhood, which is very similar to the kind of rhetoric Bolsonaro used to get elected, which is that they kill petty thieves, you know, they kill rapists, and they shoot people for smoking marijuana, things like that. And so basically, the leader of this, they're paramilitary militias, basically, and they've spread to other neighborhoods around Rio de Janeiro now. But the first one is this one from Rio das Pedras. And so the civil police the civil police anti-organized crime unit just conducted a raid and arrested a bunch of their leaders. And as it turns out, the biggest leader is this captain, former captain from the military police special forces, who has been honored 2 times in the city council by Flavia Bolsonaro. He's received like honorary awards in the city council.
That's Jair Bolsonaro's son.
Jair Bolsonaro's son, who was just elected senator. So then, it's subsequently come out that this militia leader's mother and wife were working as employees of Flavio Bolsonaro. And there's another employee of Flavio Bolsonaro's, supposedly his driver, who's been busted in this huge paper trail of making dozens of illicit deposits into Flavio Bolsonaro's bank account. At one point, he gave 25,000 reais to Jair Bolsonaro's wife. And so there's now this whole paper trail of what appears to be money laundering activities going on. And it's come out that this militia leader's wife and girlfriend have been working for Flavio Bolsonaro without actually having to show up to work, and kicking back like 90% of their salaries every month to the driver, who then transferred it into Flavio's bank accounts, along with other phantom employees. It's come out that Flavio Bolsonaro had a full-time job in Brasilia working in the cabinet of his father when his father was congressman, at the same time that he was doing an internship at a university in Rio de Janeiro that he had to show up for work at. So he was supposedly working at 2 places in the same time. And now, okay, it's also come out that there were these 2 twin brother military police officers who were arrested for being militia members a month and a half ago. Their sister is the treasurer for Jair Bolsonaro's political party in Rio de Janeiro, the PSL. She's the political party treasurer on the books as an employee of Flavio Bolsonaro, as a member of his cabinet, until like 2 months ago when these investigations began. So as this all thickens, as this plot thickens, it's come out that this militia organization called the Escritório do Crime from Rio das Pedras is the #1 suspect in the Marielle Franco assassination. City Councilwoman Marielle Franco, who was brutally assassinated last year for apparently, one of the things that she was doing before she was assassinated was heavily criticizing and trying to get investigations underway into the connection between the military police and these militias. Right. Okay? And Jair Bolsonaro was the only candidate for president who did not make a public statement on Marielle Franco's death. And so meanwhile, as this is all going on, Sergio Moro, who was hailed as this impartial, non-political anti-corruption crusader in the New York Times and all the other hegemonic media in the North, as he was arresting Lula for nothing, he's now taken all kinds of legal measures to protect Flavio Bolsonaro from prosecution, including firing the guy who announced that all of the evidence had been found on these illegal bank transfers and money laundering, was fired from his office and replaced with someone. And he's also saying, well, this office, it's like an office of auditing from the federal government of politicians and stuff. COAF it's called anyway. But now he's saying, well, they're not allowed to communicate any of their information to the press, which is ironic because Sergio Moro was busted illegally wiretapping Lula and Dilma Rousseff and leaking that to the press when he was going after them, and he got a slap on the wrist from the Supreme Court for that. So his whole modus operandi is leaking information on allegations and rumors and hearsay against the PT party, but now he's blocked his own government from doing it against the Bolsonaro family.
Right, and also, and I think is it correct that as Bolsonaro has obviously announced this wave of austerity measures in keeping with his Wall Street aligned advisors, that one area where there's a pay increase is for the judiciary. That was, of course, so helpful in blocking the democratic process and jailing Lula.
Yeah, well, one of the first things that happened after the coup was that Temer gave a big raise to the judiciary. But now, yeah, basically it's very confusing because they're using Trump-style cognitive dissonance psyops techniques where one member of the government will announce some huge change. Everyone in the media starts talking about it. And then a week later, someone else says, no, it's not really going to happen. The guy was wrong. But the economics minister of Bolsonaro is a University of Chicago trained super neoliberal economist who lived in Chile during the Pinochet dictatorship. Was friends with a bunch of people in Pinochet's inner circle. And he's trying to do all kinds of crazy austerity reforms. And they want to do a Chilean-style reform of the retirement system, and Bolsonaro's announced he's going to spare the judiciary and the military from that, of course. And they're obviously the ones who create the biggest drain on the retirement system. So
right. So even if you were following that really narrow logic, that would be the place you'd want to cut.
Yeah,
all right, we only have a couple minutes more, but I do want to touch on, obviously, there's this attempted coup happening in Venezuela. And again, there's like the nature of the Venezuelan government is a completely secondary conversation when the United States attempts to, remove a neighboring government from power. So you had also just done an interview in Brazil Wire, and one of the reasons, Brazil Wire is indispensable for Brazil, and one of the reasons is frankly, in addition to very smart analysis from people like Brian, it's also one of the only places in the United States or in English language media where you can just read interviews with people who, look, not only the left in Brazil, but in fact, still one of the, maybe organizationally, still the most important political party in Brazil, the Workers' Party, the PT. And you just did an interview with the head of PT, who she had just returned actually from a trip to Venezuela. So is there a way, and of course Bolsonaro is completely signed on to this Trump CIA effort. What is the sort of PT, what is the Brazilian dynamic left and right in relation to what's happening in Venezuela right now?
Well, it's very clear, regardless of what, I like to compare Venezuela to like the AFL-CIO, because I could look at the AFL-CIO and say, oh, look, they've done all these problems, they've done all these stupid things over the years. But, in general, I still support them, and I support the autonomy and the self-determination of their base level members to elect whoever they want to AFL-CIO leadership.
Right.
I'm not going to say we have to get rid of the AFL-CIO. Yeah. And so Gleisi Hoffmann was attacked repeatedly by a bunch of reporters from The Guardian for going to Maduro's inauguration. And Chavez and Lula were good friends and everything. And so especially Tom Phillips, he spent a whole day ridiculing her on Twitter. Tom Phillips is like the Latin America editor of Guardian now. Mm-hmm. And so she made a statement to the press. She said, anyone who criticizes my visit to Venezuela doesn't understand the concepts of sovereignty and self-determination. And so when I interviewed her, I said, look, I actually don't think a lot of Americans and British people really understand those concepts very well, because both countries have such a long imperialist history. Even a lot of progressives and liberals think that, for example, the U.S. should, if they see something going wrong in another country, should step in and solve human rights issues or whatever. So she said basically the PT had to go and participate in Maduro's inauguration because they respect the sovereignty and the self-determination of the Venezuelan people. Maduro was elected with 67% of the vote. The opposition guy who declared himself president didn't even run for office because he knew he was going to lose. Okay, so Chavez and Maduro, whatever their faults were, they did a lot to strengthen the third world left, and the PT is in full solidarity with them at this moment, just as the governments of China and Russia, Turkey, and Mexico have all announced that they refuse to recognize Guaidó or whatever as the president of Venezuela. So basically, I think that it's important to know that all of the labor unions and all of the social movements in South America right now are on the sides of the Maduro administration. Right. There's a class divide at work. And as I'm saying this, I'm sure there's going to be some people going on commenting saying, oh, I'm from Venezuela. You don't know what's going on down there, whatever. It's important to know that the middle class, whites, from these countries in South America that have a long legacy of slavery, like Brazil and Venezuela, generally act more progressive than they really are when they're in the United States, if they're up there living in the United States. And there's a huge amount of racism. This is a very entitled social class. The working class and the poor in countries like Venezuela and Brazil don't speak English. English is a sign of being a member of the elite. And we're talking about people who grew up with armies of servants and kitchen maids, women washing their underwear for them and stuff, who are now acting like they care about the fate of the poor people in their countries. Just as when I start talking about Lula, I get trolled by Brazilians up in the U.S. Even I saw Boots Riley was being trolled by Venezuelan whites yesterday on Twitter too. So just keep in mind.
Well, keep in mind, one of the most stunning, and I know you have obviously way more experience in images of this, but I'll just leave it with this. I saw an image, and I'll admit, I think actually I did do a little bit of coverage of the coup in real time, and we called it right. Although I think, at that time, particularly before the coup, I had more room for talking about, a sort of broader analysis of the dynamics in Brazil, but still recognizing the achievements of PT in opposing the coup. But one of the things that really brought it home for me, just at the outset, before I even did more research, was just a photo of, a light-skinned, upper-middle-class family in regalia going to an anti-PT protest, and literally like a black woman maid walking behind them looking pissed. I was like, all right, I think I know what side of this equation I trust. And, there's a lot more to be spelled out. And I'm not going to, carry water for anybody, but the basic dynamics are in place. It is what it is, and we have to oppose it. Although that being said, Brian, I recognize Lula as president of Brazil. So
yeah, I posted your tweet on my Facebook page yesterday, and
nice.
Hundreds of Brazilians shared it and everything. Everyone was greatly approved.
Awesome. Well, Lula Livre, Brian Mier, I appreciate your time as always. Please, everybody, read and contribute to Brazil Wire. It's indispensable, and follow Brian's work really all over the place now. One of the sort of positive things that have happened over the last several months is now a lot more people, I think, are reading you and Brazil Wire.
Yeah, well, thanks for your support with it as well. I'm sure you've contributed to that being, happening.
It's my
honor.
honor.
I appreciate it.
Thank you, Brian. Talk to you soon.
All right, take it easy.
Bye. All right, folks, we are going to take a very brief break and come back with Eva Golinger. Welcome back to the Majority Report. Joining us now is Eva Golinger. She is the former legal advisor to Hugo Chavez. She's a journalist, television host, investigative reporter, author of Confidant of quote-unquote Tyrants, which is a memoir of her political work in Venezuela, how she came to play that role, and her meeting with many other people, including Fidel Castro, Gaddafi, and others. Eva, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me on the show.
So Eva, to the extent it's possible, where are we right now? And by the way, I've been calling it an attempted coup. Would you use that same terminology in Venezuela?
Oh, yeah. It's beyond an attempted coup. It's a coup that's still developing. It's a coup in development because there's still no final outcome. It's not a coup that's been yet thwarted. It's not a coup that was successful. It's still playing out in real time, and there's really no clear end game at this stage. And I think that goes to show even further the level of improvisation that we're dealing with here with this particular government in the United States that, of course, has been backing this and encouraging it now for a while, but particularly over the past few weeks as things have developed in Venezuela that have given way to this as well, opened the doors to it. But it's really the improvisation that's terrifying because we have that in the United States. We're living that daily with the Trump administration and everything, all their policies and what they're trying to do, what he's particularly doing, the way he operates. And now we're seeing it play out with an incredibly volatile, dangerous foreign policy issue. And so, and the opposition in Venezuela has a history of improvisation. It's also part of the culture in Venezuela, but, they did this in 2002 when they tried to overthrow Hugo Chavez in a coup that was briefly successful and then was defeated by a popular uprising of the majority of Venezuelans and also loyal military forces. But at that time, the opposition had done the same thing. They had convinced Washington that they could do it. And so Washington backed them in every way possible, funneling millions of dollars and all the political and diplomatic support and even military support. They sent in, there were ships there were Black Hawk helicopters. They were all in for this. And then at the last minute, they realized, oh man, these people, they're not going to be able to do it. So the U.S. tried to back out, and it was too late. They went forward, they failed. So now we're seeing it once again, although this time the stakes are higher and the situation is different. There's, at that time, I think Chavez was also more fresh in his role as president, and people were just horrified that was happening in the country. It was, outrageous. But now it's been a prolonged period of crisis in the country. Nicolas Maduro is not Chavez. He doesn't enjoy that same level of admiration from his supporters. They basically put up with him because he's the guy that Chavez asked them to elect. And so they did. And he's the only one so far who's shown the leadership to carry forward, that particular project, the Bolivarian Revolution, even though it's been disastrous under his rule. But at the same time, it's different. The level of morality is low. People are suffering a severe economic crisis. The number one problem is corruption in his government. He's constantly making promises that he can't keep, can't follow through on. Nothing's gotten better. The economy is really just completely devastated. And so I think there's much more support for change in the country. And when this guy, Juan Guaido, who's was a relatively unknown face of the opposition, took on this very charismatic stance and doesn't have that same tarnished history as other opposition leaders do, as participating in past coups and violence and, just corrupt political parties. This guy's very young, fresh-faced, charismatic, making also big promises of stability and transition and reconciliation. So I think there's more openness to hearing him out. But at the same time, we have a change in the region. Just a few years ago, a majority of countries would never have backed a situation like this. They would never have endorsed any kind of regime change in a neighboring country. And the tables have turned entirely. It's really astonishing to see how the transformation in Latin America just a few years ago was a unified front against foreign intervention. It was, proclaiming their independence and sovereignty and as a regional power unified. And now, of course, it's completely divided on ideological lines. And a majority of countries in South America have come out against Maduro and are supporting this coup. And so that, combined with the Trump administration's unwavering and very enthusiastic support that could include some kind of military intervention, is what could push this over the edge. But I would just add, before concluding this summary of events, is that the major game changer here, of course, is the Venezuelan military, and at this very moment they're backing Maduro, and it would be hard to see them cross the line to back an opposition that's supported by the United States, because that would clearly be seen as treasonous. Right. And is not, most of these military, they may not support what Maduro's doing, but they certainly support the defense and sovereignty of their nation. So there would have to be a different sort of way out that wouldn't be seen as aligning with the United States. And then, of course, we have to factor in Russia and China's support for Maduro, which creates Venezuela, or turns Venezuela into a geopolitical battlefield. That's a struggle then between the West and, Russia and China over this country with the largest oil reserves on the planet.
What, the second largest oil reserves on the planet?
The largest oil reserves.
The largest oil reserves on the planet. So okay, well, I want to just for a minute deal with basically the Bolivarian project and the social formation around it. And I like that you outlined it. And again, I keep saying, if ever there was a time to be able to hold multiple thoughts in your head at once, it would be now, obviously, right? So of course there are failings of Nicolas Maduro and of this present government. And there's also massive accomplishments of particularly Hugo Chavez, which we have no discussion of in the United States, right? And obviously during an attempted coup, the primary responsibility of those of us in the United States is to actively and vehemently oppose a coup. And so all of that being said, in terms of the social formation around Maduro, you talked about obviously the popular surge that protected Chavez from the Bush 2002 coup. I've heard, and I'm talking to you because you're a source I trust, right? There's a lot of sources I don't even know enough to trust or not trust, frankly. But one of the things I've heard is that unlike in previous efforts, there are poorer parts of Caracas, as an example, places where the traditional social base of this of Bolivarian politics have rallied before to defend this project from foreign intervention and domestic oligarchs, but that there's actually like some of those demographics are rising up as well because things have been so bad. And I guess I have a two-part question. One, I mean, is that true? And secondly, what is the combination here of internal failings versus just like the relentless U.S. pressure of sanctions and investment in opposition as well? Like, what's the kind of fusion of innate failings versus ongoing relentless U.S. interference?
This is really a type of what you would call low-intensity warfare or asymmetric warfare. It's been going on for a long time. That does not discount the role that the government itself has played in their own dysfunctional policies and their, allowing corruption to basically become a malignant force within the government. But at the same time, there's no question. I mean, particularly the U.S. through their different funding agencies like USAID or National Endowment for Democracy, even just directly through State Department, think tanks like Freedom House, others that are used as fronts to channel funds to, and even in some cases creating NGOs that work to undermine governments that aren't favorable to U.S. agenda, that this over time is a way, it just tires out the people. It becomes it penetrates so deeply into civil society that it's unrecognizable as being something imposed from external interests. So I mean that does play a huge role in what's gone on in the poorer neighborhoods. But at the same time, I mean, the primary reason that a majority of lower income areas supported Chavez in the first place was because of his policies. I mean, yeah, he was a charismatic guy, he cared about people. But, they wouldn't have supported him for so long and put their lives on the line to defend him for so many years in the face of so much destabilization and, different attempted coups and aggressions against them if it wasn't for the fact that his policies were servicing their basic needs. People were the quality of life improved dramatically under Chavez. So all of that now has been rolled back under Maduro, in part because of sanctions and economic warfare from private enterprises and abroad. But I mean, I have to say, I know what's going on there. There's a lot of corruption. They've been embezzling a lot of money out, and it's mismanagement. So there are bad people in place in charge of a lot of the finances of the country, and they've been stealing money. I mean, that just straight out. So that's also a combination of what's been going on. And so, yes, the support from the traditional grassroots community bases in Venezuela for the government has dramatically eroded over the past couple of years because of the economic crisis, primarily because of that, because in general, people don't care as much if their president has authoritarian tendencies or not, so long as they can eat and earn a decent wage and, pay for all their expenses. I mean, it comes down to that. Most people are not highly politicized and aren't thinking about that on an everyday basis. They're thinking about how much money do they have and can they afford everything that they need in their lives. So once the tables start to turn on that, you think with your stomach. That was always something said in Venezuela before Chavez and afterward, is people think first with their stomach. If you can't eat, you're going to get angry. And so you're going to blame who's in charge, who's preventing that, you from being able to meet your basic needs. And in this case, it is Maduro. So, I mean, I think that is absolutely true. And I mean, I've been talking nonstop to people on the ground in different areas around the country. And last night was a night full of protests, bullets, people got killed. There was a lot of commotion in all over Caracas, particularly, and in the poorer neighborhoods as well, in popular sectors. And then at the same time, Maduro's people and he himself called for his supporters to rally around the presidential palace and protect him. Nobody was out there at midnight. It was empty. Wow. So that would never have happened during Chavez. People would have slept out there if they needed to. So I think that's a huge change, is we're not seeing kind of support for Maduro.
I mean, do you think that might change just as the United States continues this and there's like an actual threat of military action? Like, does that logic start to shift back of, wait a second, whatever, like the same logic that you said that the military officers might have, that whatever else we say about him, we can't have a coup here. And incidentally, what opposition realistically in any way is going to, my sense is that the people that oppose Maduro that would be backed by the United States, all of the same problems, whether they be corruption or embezzlement or, cartel connections, whatever, sure, there'll be all of that, and there'll be a complete elimination of the social advances and autonomy that this government has delivered.
Well, and let's not kid ourselves. The opposition is comprised of political parties primarily that ruled before or are some kind of hybrid of those that had power before the Bolivarian Revolution, extremely corrupt, embezzled billions of dollars out of the country, were responsible for the skyrocketing poverty in Venezuela and the marginalization of a majority of Venezuelans. So, that is obviously a concern. But at this stage, people feel as though, well, we don't, if we can get food on our plates, then it may not matter who's in power. And so I think it'll come down to that. There certainly is a hardcore base of supporters, Chavistas, I would say. They're not necessarily Maduristas, like Maduro hardcore supporters, but they believe they're following through on that project, which is really about Venezuela's sovereignty and a project of social justice, and they would fight to the death. So there are civilian militias that are trained and armed. It's not a country that's defenseless, and they do have the backing of Russia. They do have powerful equipment. Doesn't mean they could come up against the U.S. military in any sense, but they wouldn't go out with like their heads between their knees. There are a lot who would fight. That said, I think that hopefully it won't come to that, and there could be some kind of negotiated process out of this situation. But what's happening now is completely unprecedented, violates every concept of international law, sovereignty, rights to self-determination. Essentially, the legislative branch, the head of the legislative branch has declared himself the head of the executive branch, is being recognized by, powerful foreign nations, and is working presently out of the Colombian embassy in Caracas to set up a government. He has no control over anything in the country. He doesn't have control over institutions. He doesn't have control over the finances. He doesn't have control over the oil industry. So that it comes down to, what is the next step here? This is all developing in real time and seems highly improvised, and it doesn't seem as though they really have a clear path forward. If they think that Maduro is going to just walk out of the presidential palace, I would say, I could be wrong. Things could change, but as it stands right now, I just do not see that happening.
Obviously, they've been trying to instigate something for quite some time, right? And going back, of course, Bush through Obama, you called it the high intensity and the economic warfare against Venezuela. But specifically with Trump, that was one of the reasons that that ridiculous John Oliver commentary on Venezuela that was such nonsense from a year or two ago, because he was dismissing the idea that the Venezuelan government was putting forward of U.S. interference, literally at the same time that Mike Pompeo, when he was head of the CIA, was actually publicly saying this. And of course, Trump has said any number of things threatening Maduro and Venezuela publicly. And I think on some level, obviously there's a bigger history behind this, but this might be the time to instigate this because the government shutdown strategy is totally failing, right? Like, that really is the level of just total nonsense we're dealing with in terms of Trump, in addition to like the traditional U.S. interests that would, and have instigated like over 40 something coups in Latin America in the last, couple of dozen years. So like, if you were back there advising, what would first, I guess before we get to like your potential solution space, do you actually think that it could get as bad as some type of military invasion? And does that specifically have to do with Maduro expelling diplomats and them refusing to leave?
Well, there could be a standoff. That certainly seems like a provocation on the part of the United States to, refuse to obey that's international law. That's the Vienna Convention on diplomatic and consular relations, that every country has the right to make that kind of decision. That's a sovereign right. At the same time, the U.S. Embassy in Caracas, the U.S. residence in Caracas for its diplomats, those are sovereign territories of the United States. That's how it works. So, like, Venezuelan forces can't go into those spaces and forcibly remove them. I don't think that they would do that anyway. I think it would just be a very volatile standoff. However, if they were to be provoked and something were to happen, I foresee a Grenada type situation where the U.S. would then say, we have to go in and rescue our people, so we're bringing in the Marines, and that could open the door. Or they could do it with special forces. I mean, Colombia is right on the other side of Venezuela's border. They have a massive military presence, particularly of special forces in Colombia and U.S. military bases. So, this has been the U.S. has been preparing for a regime change in Venezuela now from the time pretty much the coup failed against Chavez in 2002. It's a state policy. It's not partisan.
Right.
It's bipartisan. So this is just a culmination. I think that, as we're seeing with most of the Trump administration, Trump particularly himself, he's just sloppy with his agenda. He just blurts it out. I mean, most of them would have kept it sort of under wraps. This is what we're doing. They've just been open and notorious about, we want regime change, and Trump himself has said now at least 3 times publicly that he's considering a military option in Venezuela. So there's really no clear indication of how that would play out, except for the fact that it would be extraordinarily dangerous and messy and would probably result in a bloodbath. I mean, what else is going to happen?
Right.
What good has come of any U.S. intervention anywhere in the world? And then if Maduro and his inner circle decide to bunker down as they're doing so far, I mean, then we're looking at a similar, like an Assad situation like in Syria. And it wouldn't be the first time. Venezuela has already been mapped out by who knows how many military strategists, particularly in the U.S., but also in Colombia and around the world, to divide the country, because the oil reserves are in certain areas. They're not, all over the country. They've mapped it out. They could take it. It's by Brazil. It's by Colombia. They could take control of those areas and carve it out and into pieces, just like has happened in other countries where there have been similar situations. Libya, for example, I mean, where they go in, they create a disaster because there's really no plan, and unexpected things happen that they didn't account for. And that could be the case in Venezuela. I do think that if there's not some kind of pause put on this as soon as possible, and some more measured voices involved, as we're seeing now, like the UN Secretary General is making statements saying, this needs to slow down. We need to have dialogue to prevent disaster in Venezuela. We're hearing it. What we're hearing more in the media are the more sort of bellicose, the more aggressive voices, like the Trump administration and the OAS Secretary General, who's salivating over a military intervention in Venezuela for regime change. But, we need more measured voices. Mexico is playing that role of trying to calm the situation and encourage dialogue. Even Spain. Even France, Macron has not endorsed the opposition. He's calling for, dialogue and negotiated transition or something of the sort.
Spain specifically said, no, we don't recognize the opposition, if I understand correctly.
And I think it was more a call to dialogue.
Okay.
It wasn't a sort of assertive no, but it was more,
Gotcha.
We're not going down that path right now. And I mean, I think that that's respectable at this stage. It's not a solid position, but that's because they don't have, a fantastic relationship at the moment. Spain has a more right-wing government in place. There are countries that are taking a more measured stance, and there are those that are taking a more aggressive one. And so we just need to look at the interest behind those countries. The U.S. has a direct interest. They want Venezuela's oil. Venezuela is a geostrategic nation. They want control of it again, like they had before. Russia's there, Iran is there, China's there. They want the U.S. wants them out. Right. So they have a very specific and direct interest in regime change. And other countries are more measured. Mexico, even Bolivia, that backs Maduro. But Evo Morales just wants peace in the region. I mean, they want stability. And the same, I think, would go for, even China. China didn't come out and say, we back Nicolas Maduro. They just said, we do not back foreign interference in Venezuela's affairs.
Right. Well, Eva Golinger, I really appreciate your time as always. I recommend that everybody who uses Twitter as an example be following Eva, because this is a main source for understanding what goes on. We're going to talk more about this in the second half of the show, but I mean, this is a time, not to be puritanical about it, but I mean, Ro Khanna has stepped forward and opposed this. There's been some sort of signal boost for that, I think, from Ilhan Omar and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. But this is a one that everybody's going to need to get on the map on if they have any kind of claim to any type of sort of left-wing leadership, because this is a coup and could be, like Grenada, except even worse because of just the stakes, right? Not that Grenada wasn't horrible in and of itself. Eva Golinger, I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much as always.
Thanks for having me on the show.
Appreciate it. All right, folks. So become a member of the Majority Report today. You get content like that. I don't even know how cable news is covering it. Independent, unbought, unbossed, less pennies a day. Click the Become a Member link and join, and also subscribe to the show on YouTube if you haven't already, all the other ways. We covered this sort of thing in depth on the Michael Brooks Show, and a lot of the history and the context around this as well. As an example, we just did an illicit history of Chavez and the Bolivarian Revolution with Eva Golinger for patrons of the Michael Brooks Show. Become a patron of it today at patreon.com/DMBS, and also go check out the YouTube channel for the Michael Brooks Show. Overlapping but distinct content there, and it will give you a flavor of the show. Good running thread on the tracksuits I'm wearing as well. And there's some tickets left. Legit, not many at this point, but some, to our first live show, Bell House, February 1st. Snag them while you can and become a patron at patreon.com/TMBS. Jamie, what it do? I'm sorry, Matt. Don't yell into the mic.
So this week on the Antifada, we have the second ever edition of History is a Weapon with Sean, KB, and special guest Matt Chrisman from Chapo Trap House. They get a little bit personal, actually. They talk about why both of their brains have been broken by history and their personal connections to that. Also, they answer the question, why, of all advanced capitalist countries, is the United States unique in its historical failure to form a bona fide labor socialist party that's organically tied to the union labor movement as an institutionalized political expression of working class interests?
Sounds like Matt Crispin might be an American exceptionalist.
Well, America is exceptional in maybe some bad ways. Yeah, that's true. But it turns out that America was ahead of the curve on that. On this division between the labor movement and any kind of left political party, right? Because Europe for a while had them, and then those parties all turned neoliberal at the end of the day. Labor is trying to realign right now, but it's sort of interesting that the U.S. got there first, and then the other countries took kind of a roundabout journey. So they go back and forth about history. They both know a lot about history. P.S. I just listened to it and I learned a lot, actually.
Awesome, Matt.
Literary Hangover. We did The House of the Seven Gables by Nathaniel Hawthorne, a very weird story about how Puritans lived on through basically inheritance into the 18th century. Beautiful.
All right, folks. We will see you on the fun half. Wait, what was that?
We'll do this. We're going to do this song again. This is a Sam Cedar remix, so it'll be a shorter into the fun half, but people like this instead.
All right. Okay.
Calling from a 919 area code. Who's this? Where you come from? Wow. Awesome. Well, let's just do this exercise. Do it. Whoa. super sick.
It's all good.
Super sick.
Hell yeah.
Right. You don't need to means test Social Security. You don't need to means test Medicare. Nobody cares. The way that you means test that, you tax wealthy people more. And that's just simply not enough.
And as you always say, as soon as you stick in that access, then we already do have universal health.
I have access to a BMW.
Right.
It's a weird time for politics right now.
That's legit galaxy brain.
This is a freak shit.
Love it all.
He finally got to fulfill his destiny. Burger sommelier. Just a little baby.
Very legal. Very good.
I thought this was a joke.
Hamburglar.
Well, I mean, but things are really bad. All right. Jamie and I may have a disagreement.
Yeah, you can't just say whatever you want about people just because you're rich.
I have an absolute right to mock them on YouTube.
He's up there buggy whipping like he's the boss.
I am not your employer.
You know, I'm tired of the negativity.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to upset you. You're nervous? You're a little bit upset? You're riled up?
Yeah, maybe you should rethink your defense of that, you fucking idiots.
We're just going to get rid of you.
All right.
But dude, you want to smoke this joint?
Yes.
Do you feel like you are a dinosaur?
Some good shit.
Exactly. I'm happy now.
It's a win-win.
It's a win-win-win.
Oh, hell yeah.
Now listen to me. 2, 3, 4, 5 times. 847-906-501-457. 2, 38, 56, 27. 1/2. 5 8s. 3.9 billion.
Wow.
He's the ultimate math nerd.
Don't you see?
Why don't you get a real job instead of spewing vitriol and hatred, you left-wing Limbaugh?
Everybody's taking their dumb juice today.
Come on, Sammy.
Dance, dance, dance.
Ooh.
Rand Paul.
I had my first post-coital scene with a woman. I'm hoping to add more moves to my repertoire. All I have is the dip and the swirl.
Fine, we can double dip.
Yes, this is a perfect moment.
No.
Wait, what?
You make under $1 million a year. You're scum. You're nothing.
Excuse me? Fuck you, you fucking liberal elite. I think you belong in jail.
Thank you for saying that, Sam. You're a horrible, despicable person.
All right, gonna take a quick break. I want to take a moment to talk to some...
Welcome to the fun half on the Majority Report. Had to go longer on the main show because of all that's going down.
I learned a lot.
Yeah, those are very good guests, both of them. You're calling from an 847 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Hi, Michael. It's Josh from Chicago.
Josh, what's on your mind?
I want to talk about this Kamala Harris stuff.
Okay.
So I don't know about you, but it's actually made me appreciate what Elizabeth Warren has been doing so far in the race. And I think of the people who are in the race, she is by far the best.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the thing that like really bothers me about this Kamala Harris stuff, and why I still might even prefer Gillibrand, although I think Gillibrand's messaging sucks. Gillibrand's messaging sucks.
Gillibrand sucks.
She does suck. She does suck.
Yeah.
But like people's lives were affected by Kamala Harris's policies.
That's true.
I guess in ways that I don't think Gillibrand's were. And
that's
I
true.
think in terms of like moms who were or people who were sent to jail for truancy.
Right.
You know, they got sent to jail for truancy, but Steve Mnuchin didn't, and like I think that's kind of a form of white supremacy.
All right. I mean, look, I don't know if you have anything else. I mean, you know, I hear you. I agree. I mean, I think we've already. I did a segment for TMBS, which I think like it did. I don't want to. Well, I'll repeat a little bit of it. I think that we got to be very strategic about how we deal with Kamala Harris. I think that Kamala Harris is. I think she will be the one that dominates the centrist lane. I think that I could just tell you by anecdote of normal people, quote unquote, and as always, I define that in a positive way, and that basically just means people who are not like on Twitter and thinking about politics all the time. I think that people on both sides, both like the left and both other people who like, as an example, like some people, people who support Kamala Harris are, I actually think, in a very reductionist and condescending way, going like,
Tokenist.
oh, yeah, tokenist, whatever word you want to use. They're going to say, oh, this is a black woman, so she's going to be excited about Kamala Harris. And then conversely, I think that there's some of us who are correct. I mean, there's an objective record here on prosecuting Kamala Harris has, which is abysmal. Not surprising, not exceptional. But the function of that job is one of oppression and abuse, and she was an active participant in it, and also on all sorts of other things from, sex legislation, sex registries. I mean, just really, really, really bad, really repressive stuff, and Sesta and everything. She's bad on these issues, objectively. Now, there's a context of why she's bad, which we could talk about, but the reality is she's bad, okay? But I think that people need to play it and do it with a certain degree of class, as Ana Navarro would say.
Yeah, I agree.
And you have to acknowledge, the obvious appeal. Look, who amongst us would not, on some level, and I mean this, of course, I could not mean this more metaphorically and more figuratively, but on some level, a black woman killing Donald Trump in 2020, figuratively, would be an immense pleasure to watch for any right-thinking human being. So what I would say is is that the people who are making the condescending, reductionist, people just support her because they share an identity, is condescending. It's wrong, and it's not validated. Again, I've talked to people where it's like, oh, that's really cool. That's interesting. I'm fascinated by an intelligent, interesting candidate who might be the first black woman president. But what are her plans on healthcare? What are her plans on jobs? Mm-hmm. Like, that's where they go, to the natural, obvious place that most voters would go. And then conversely, I just think you always have to stipulate, the obvious aspects of her appeal, and then just get to work on why, her donors, her agenda's insufficient, and her record's profoundly troubling, which is objective reality. And I actually think, frankly, I've tried to do that. I mean, it's harder with some of them, but I think you got to be clinical about all of them. I think as pure political products, they all have strengths. Biden has strengths. Beto has strengths. Gillibrand her strengths, honestly, are less apparent to me. But Harris certainly has strengths. And so you just got to, keep the relentless focus on the policy. And then that when people, if people try to come at you and say that you're, negating her because of her identity, you say well, actually, I'm talking about X. I'm talking about criminalizing truancy. What are your thoughts on that? And the disturbing thing I've noticed is that, some people's thoughts on that are shockingly disturbing and retrograde.
Yeah.
And so people are revealing themselves. They're defending locking up nonviolent drug offenders. They're defending 3 strikes laws. They're defending all sorts of retrograde policies. And then that's beautiful, because then we're on the terrain we should be in, which is actually hashing out these policies and explaining why we support restorative justice and radical systemic reform of the criminal justice system. So that's, to me, that's all there is to it.
I can't wait to see her get interrupted with a protest from Black Lives Matter.
We'll see.
That's going to happen.
This is the issue.
Yeah.
And, just from a tactical standpoint, maybe white Bernie bros shouldn't go as hard on Kamala Harris as some of their black and brown comrades.
I mean, go hard. To me, it's just so, it's like, if you acknowledge the obvious parts of her appeal, and you go like a laser on the policy, then, all right, whatever. There's no objection to that. amongst any right-thinking, commentators. But yeah, I think that people have to be quite mindful about, how they go about it.
Yeah, and don't say gratuitously offensive things that might be construed as racist or sexist.
I
Don't
heard
even
she
get
had
in that
sickle cell.
neighborhood.
I heard she had a fucking sickle cell.
I think I know what she's talking about.
She had sickle cell.
Like, I don't want to believe that Bernie bros are real, but like there's
don't
sexists in
feed
every
into
single movement and every single part of society. And, unfortunately, the left is not immune from that.
That's true, but we don't need to also bend over backwards to feed into that mythology either. So let's just see how it, let's just see how we do, how we play out. But I mean, I agree with you. I'm not a supporter of Kamala Harris, but that is just for the simple reason that I have politics that she doesn't have. I mean, this is, at some level, it's crystal clear stuff. I want radical prison reform. I want Medicare for all. I want the United States to stop backing coups. I don't want to support Israeli apartheid.
Oh God, the Israel stuff is insane.
But it's not.
Terrible.
It's
terrible.
But it's but
she's worse on Israel than the average Democrat.
I don't know. I don't agree with that. I think she's totally
she
representative. No, she's not. What daylight does she have from any other standard issue Democrat? If you look at what Elizabeth Warren was saying about the Israeli bombardment of Gaza in 2014, it's essentially the same thing. And that's actually a good example, I would say, of being very careful, because I think that her record and what she said about Israel-Palestine is abominable. I think it's depressingly barely, not even distinguishable from pretty much any other major frontline politician besides Bernie Sanders and maybe if Warren is pivoting. And then the third point, which is like, there's a context here. The context is Kamala Harris, when she was getting her start, a cynical, pragmatic move to being a national political figure as both someone who's going to be called liberal, not to mention a woman of color, is to appear, quote unquote, tough on crime. That's the calculation. And everybody has made the calculation that it is so safer from a media, donor, and voting base to say, well, maybe I have a little bit of concern about, Netanyahu, demanding that all, I mean, I'm not even, the analogy I thought of is actually kind of anti-Semitic, so I won't say that. But, they will defend anything Israel does, anytime, anywhere, any place. And that's been typical of the Democratic Party until some symbolic gestures that Obama made, like in the last year he was in office. So I wouldn't say, I mean, I think she's abominable, but I don't think she's exceptional. Look up Christian Gillibrand's record. Chuck Schumer says that part of his mandate for being in the Senate is Hashem has sent him messages about Israel. I mean, this is normal shit.
Yeah, I guess I was kind of measuring her against Obama, and I will admit that I only recently really began paying attention to Israel stuff.
Obama was obviously on the whole supported Israel anytime, anywhere, any place, but Obama slightly was willing to, at the very least, as if you talk to any Israeli policy person who's on even the center left, they would say, could you at least, like in the same way that like theoretically Democrats support like the Labor Party over the Conservative Party in Britain, could you like at least support us in like the vague center left in Israel versus any fascist government and fascist politician in Israel? And Obama was slightly willing to do that, partially compounded by the fact, I think, that, he genuinely abhors racism, and also the fact that he had to deal with Netanyahu for several years. And after sitting at a certain point, you're going to just be like, dude, fuck you, because he's a profoundly unlikable person. But no, I don't. No, I think, yeah. I mean, we're going to play Kamala Harris's Israel clip, and I think at some point the Democratic Party as a whole is going to have to reconcile the tension between, embracing a very particular type of narrow multiculturalism, which is clearly, obviously preferable to white supremacy, should go without saying. I don't know how that fits. Well, there's actually one way that fits for blind support with Israel, which is actually another manifestation of the toxicity of a certain type of identity politics, frankly. And one of the reasons that I have a real allergy to essentialist arguments and identity over all else is growing up partially in the Jewish community and being like, no, my having a certain part of my identity be Jewish doesn't mean that I support dropping white phosphorus on children and not allowing people to have freedom of movement because of an identity code, or even the fact that, of course, Jewish people historically are one of the most oppressed, abused, and genocided people on the planet. So, maybe some people will reconcile it by just sort of, the same kind of shallow identity plays of any other move. But if you're really fundamentally running on overcoming supremacy, race hierarchies, and structural racism, you're going to support a Likud government in Israel? Yeah, that doesn't work. And for what it's worth, I think Obama, who had some, at least I think on that front, some very genuine commitments, actually, he at least intellectually recognized the tension. Most of these other people are just getting the script. Hillary Clinton's just getting the script. Joe Biden is, my God, just getting the script.
Oh, my God.
Beto O'Rourke slightly deviated once when there was the bombardment, I think, in 2014, and then was, cattle prodded back into line. So, we're going to we'll play this Kamala. Thanks for the call, Josh. Let's play this Kamala Harris clip now. But again, I mean, this is terrible, and this should be making the rounds. And I think that there should be a clip. And by the way, look, Bernie is getting better on this. I'm sure you could find some clips of Bernie saying stuff not as bad as this, but some pretty bad stuff in defense of Israeli actions. But this is horrible, but it's emblematic of I would, in my estimation, I don't think Kamala Harris is much of a progressive, but this is, progressive except Palestine is what they used to call it. So here is Kamala Harris.
In the midst of uncertainty and turmoil, America's support for Israel's security must be rock solid. And as Iran continues to launch ballistic missiles, while it arms and funds its terrorist proxy Hezbollah, we must stand with Israel. As Hamas maintains its control of Gaza and fires rockets across Israel's southern border, we must stand with Israel. And as ISIS and civil war in Syria destabilize the region, displacing millions and threatening shared security interests, we must support all those affected by ongoing violence and terror, and we must stand with Israel. Our defense relationship is critical to both nations, which is why I support the United States' commitment to provide Israel with $38 billion in military assistance over the next decade. It is why I support full funding for Israel, including for the Arrow, David Sling, and the Iron Dome missile defense systems, which save lives. And that's why I am fully committing to maintaining Israel's qualitative military edge.
So this is the usual pablum, and we're going to get to another candidate in a second, but I just want to be really clear about this. I mean, look, this is the rhetoric, even in an Israeli context, that is just delusional. And of such an extreme far-right position. This is in 2017, by the way, where already there's been a touch of a crack at just the basic incoherence of blindly supporting this Israeli government and professing any type of commitment to anti-discrimination or not indiscriminately killing civilians. So you've had 2009, you had 2014, both of those massacres in Gaza that were both recognized internationally as such. In Israel, though, Ehud Olmert, as an example, former Israeli prime minister, look him up, definitely committed atrocities in Lebanon and Gaza, also put the only legitimate two-state solution plan on the table, and is an interesting figure. Just got out of jail for corruption. But we all know how I feel about corruption. I don't care. But he said, he's like, look, Israel needs to understand that we are not under threat. We're not. They have nuclear weapons. They have complete military supremacy over any of their neighbors. And their primary military responsibilities are policing a Jim Crow situation in the West Bank and having a siege on Gaza. Like, you can talk to Israeli intelligence and military people. They'll say, it's very bad for us that the main workouts that our soldiers get are harassing Palestinian civilians. Terrorism was a very real issue at one point. And there's atrocities definitely in the early aughts of like Hamas blowing up pizza parlors and examples like this. First of all, you could put a security barrier inside 67 borders. The fact that they put it well into the expansion of settlements says a lot. And then furthermore, because they've never stopped constructing settlements and the demographic realities, 2 states is out the window as a matter of practicality. And if you have any type of democratic commitment, you would support the Joint List Arab Parties, which is a coalition of secularists and communists, both Jewish, Arab, as well as some Muslim, who are advocating for an across-the-board democracy. That's it. So, that being said, in a moment like this, I'd really like a leftist, a progressive, uncompromising crusader for the rights of all to step forward. And man, we just found a great Tulsi Gabbard clip talking about Palestinian human rights just in the nick of time. This is from Sunday, so this is fresh. This is really exciting. Oh, wait, no. This is from 2016? Okay. This is from 2016. Well, whatever. December 2018. Okay, so this is all right. Well, all right, we'll figure it out. But anyways, this is Tulsi Gabbard laying it down for the rights of all, or not.
Get away from 50 years of occupation and nothing happening besides for violence.
That is a complex question that requires peace, being able to have those conversations to build a path towards peace. And the short answer really is, unfortunately, with the current leadership in place, they are getting farther and farther away from the possibility or the path, building that pathway towards peace and towards that two-state solution, recognizing the respect, the equality, and the humanity of all the people who are living within that region.
Pablum, when was this?
December 2018 in New Hampshire.
Yeah, so this doesn't mean a fucking thing. And again, I love that Matt pointed out. Right, the prevarication is which leadership, of course, because that can be signaled to anybody. What she's signaling the audience is obviously Netanyahu and the far right in Israel, because it's a pro-Palestinian human rights question. But anybody else could say, oh, well, obviously, of course, she's talking about Hamas, which controls Gaza. Now, of course, there's only one faction. The Palestinian Authority in the West Bank are the only formation there that still is doing anything to support a two-state solution. Everybody else has moved on, except actually Hamas has kind of prevaricated on that. But that is not, like, by 2016, Bernie Sanders was willing to come out and give a speech where he spoke at least frankly about the humanitarian toll on Palestinians.
Yeah.
She did nothing.
He turned down his invitation to AIPAC, which
right.
is huge in the context of American politics. And
That's right.
People want to criticize Bernie from the left, and I have plenty of left criticisms of him myself. But on this particular issue, like, he is by far the best that we are going to do as of now with a viable presidential candidate. And like, he actually has a chance. So
definitely,
let's not mess that up. Also, he's very well positioned to combat charges of anti-Semitism, because the man is undeniably Jewish, whether or not he's Jewish in the way that these people want him to be. And like, honestly, I don't have a poll in front of me, but that's a lot of Jews in America. You know, we don't all support the things that Israel does.
No, particularly younger Jewish people are definitely pivoting on that issue.
Also, her answer, she says, we basically the Palestinians have to be peaceful before we try to work towards peace. She says everybody. But
And by the way, that's 100% right. And just to really put a fine point on this, okay? So, and I agree that you have to reject, of course, things like suicide bombing and any tactic that focuses on civilians, period. You have to have full stops on things, right? I'm not drawing an equivalency, but there's certain things you have to reject if you want to have a position of getting to a just place. And killing Israeli civilians with suicide bombings is totally unacceptable, obviously. Now, there's other tactics in guerrilla war that I'm not going to comment on, and I'll just say they're a lot more complicated. But anything that targets civilians, we can discard, including, of course, Israeli indiscriminate killing of civilians. And every side here has blood on its hands. It's just there's a total asymmetry of power, so you can't draw a false equivalency. But generically, every side has blood on its hands. But what's amazing about this talking point, and I don't know where Tulsi stands on the attempt to criminalize BDS movement, the boycott, divestment, and sanctions of Israel, which has been happening across the United States. It's an actual, real-life First Amendment issue. The one. The Palestinians have been lectured by a government that runs an apartheid state on them and a superpower that supplies that apartheid state with weapons and money and exports people from Brooklyn to build settlements there. While they do that, they've had the temerity to lecture Palestinians on how they should conduct their struggle. And, the same people upholding an occupation are like, well, where's the Palestinian Gandhi? Where's the Palestinian Mandela? Well, actually, interestingly enough, Mandela said that South Africa wasn't fully free till Palestine was free. Just a little point of reference. So excusing that just monumental, grotesque hypocrisy that anybody that has any role in the oppression of Palestinians has anything to say about how they conduct themselves, they did generate a mass global nonviolent movement modeled on the South Africa model. It's called boycott, divestment, and sanctions, of which you're criminalizing and equating to terrorism. So, just the complete fusion of immorality, delusion, paranoia, and racism that people bring to that discussion is just awe-inspiringly disgusting. And actually, yes, a good early preview of the profound dead end of nationalism, the profound dead end of a certain type of reductionist identity politics. To be told that because I share an identity with somebody, that I can support them in demolishing somebody's home as a form of collective punishment or dropping white phosphorus on them, on children, is disgusting. It's offensive to me as a person. All right, let's take another call. You're calling from a 510 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from? Are you there? 510. You've called. All right.
Sounds like a dog hiding a bone.
Gotta be tough. Gotta be very tough. You're calling from a 630 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
So I've been listening to you guys every day, and I've got beef. And that beef is sausage. Left is best. And I listen to you guys, and what do I hear but crapping on the greatest pizza that there ever was?
Oh, my
Chicago
God.
Deep Dish.
All right,
No,
Sam is going to call at
Pizza
2,
is a
just a heads up.
Object,
All right.
You are robbing the proletariat of their culture. When you say New York pizza is anything other than a poor facsimile given to you by a bourgeois oppressor, it's garbage, it's trash, it's soaked in grease, it's unedible. It's if McDonald's did pizza, except McDonald's pizza would at least be edible.
All right, dude.
Where
Where
is
is this?
okay.
What is
Oh,
your
yeah.
name and where are you calling from?
Which bourgeois oppressor gave us pizza?
The Italians.
No,
What-
pizza itself is food of the proletariat from Nepal.
Yeah, the Romans.
Nepalese,
The Romans.
and Italy, obviously.
Yeah, the
But
Romans.
The bourgeois then co-opted it to rob you of the cultural heritage.
All right, what's your
Every
call?
region of
What's your
America
name
has
and where are you
its
calling from?
cultural
What's your
sorry,
name?
I asked.
What's your name and where are you
Oh,
calling
this is
from?
Ryan from Chicago.
Ryan from Chicago. All right, Ryan. Well, with that, I bid you adieu. Thank you, Ryan.
Goodbye.
Have a good one. John McCain's brain tumor, solidarity with Charlie Kirk's blood clot. I taught you well. Now do your best.
Somebody is saying that
Hell yeah.
they're doing that. Remember that guy who, I think is Your Kickstarter Sucks guy, said that they were dropping chicken on the floor and serving it to Trump supporters at the restaurant? Some guy on Twitter has been saying that he's was the nurse at the ER, and he's the one who told Charlie Kirk, and that all the nurses are laughing at him. And people
That's so good. Oh yeah, Sean loves to jump into those threads too and pretend to be like a MAGA. No, he's like the MAGA version of Antifa. It's you just got to check it out.
Are you outing Sean as having MAGA sock puppets?
No. No.
Very interesting.
No, he's like, hey, I'm the president of Antifa.
Oh, I see.
We're coming for all you, Republic, whatever. Never mind.
Miff Schmechter. Hiya, gang. This week on the grocery store checkout scanner, my co-host, Blom Terraclassis, and I talk with Eric Blolart and ask, why these crack-a-honkies be tripping about Kamala Harris? What? In 2020. Tell people know that black politicians have to hurt black people in order to get into a position where they can be a model for kids of the black people they hurt. That is a more eloquent distillation of essentially the argument that I've seen over the last 48 hours. And remember to donate $75 to the pod, and our great friend Jar Jar Binks will send you a voicemail of doing the one that Chris Rock bit that no one lets me do in the office. Jesus Christ. A lot of shade. JB, MSNBC seems to have strongly endorsed Harris, of course.
Yeah, she's already doing a town hall with Jake Tapper on Monday.
Yeah,
like
I mean,
that's the plan is in motion. Folks.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I'm saying. You have a pack. It's Booker and Gillibrand, and then Beto and Biden, either of them announced they'll be in the mix to some degree. But I mean, Harris it's just pulled. I mean, this really is where you should just read, like, it's in Bolivia, but watch the documentary Our Brand is Crisis on literally like the mechanics of how campaigns are assembled and how the brand strategy is developed. And this is in motion. I mean, this is A/B product testing, and one product for a variety of reasons is best. So he's just going to pop in. All right, cool. All right. Easy M, killing it today. Rat-tat-tat-tat. All right, thank you. J. Cole, what does Haitian Jimmy Dore think about the Venezuelan coup? I think you should totally be asking that. By the way, I have heard from my circles, which include people from the Haitian community, that was not so bad. So fuck you, and especially you have no impressions. Sam has one impression.
Clearly, you do not listen to my show, because then you would hear my Alex Jones impression. See, you have never listened to a single episode of my show.
Fake news.
I've listened to your show plenty.
That's fake news. You have not done an Alex Jones impressions on one I've heard.
I haven't listened to any of your shows, so quit.
Wait, I want to hear the Alex Jones impression.
I guess you just have to listen to the Antifada.
Oh, boy.
You can't hear my Alex Jones impression if you don't listen to my show.
That's competitive. All right. Okay, what does Haitian Jimmy? Well, no, because I don't actually. I would say probably Jimmy's gonna have a decent reaction on Venezuela. That's the wrong one. Or probably like, I want a Lava Jato T-shirt.
I don't know to see what Tulsi says.
Yeah, right. If Tulsi says, I think that there's going to need to be mediated talks, and on one hand there's a coup, but on the other hand there's a lot of heated rhetoric. What I do at TMBS, it was like, some say that Gandhi was a leader of the peace movement who was assassinated by a fanatic, and others say that he was a pussy vegan who was way too soft on the dirty Muslims. So I think we need to come together as both sides to figure this out. I think Haitian Jimmy Dore will probably have a lot more thoughts on the election, though. That I can assure you. And sometimes, Ryan, kudos to Chris Cuomo for getting the fuck after it. Yeah, that was good. Gleason, next time you talk about AOC and the 75% rate, mention how conservative it is. She's starting after 10 million when before it started around 3 million in today's dollars. Indeed. Speaking of which, I think this is a good transition. So I sometimes go on I-24, which is this global. I mean, I guess because it's Israeli. Not David Schuster's not right wing, but I mean, I have not always realized how unbelievably, insanely far right a lot of the editorial is around me, and I always am debating people who are like, they have a lot of troubles, is how I'll put it. And the host yesterday, he was just like, well, how do you think AOC and Rashida Tlaib are doing? They've both been getting into a lot of trouble. I was like, and I said, well, I think they're both doing great, as evidenced by the Republican total shambolic response to them. And as if on cue, right, around the same time I was doing that hit, Sean Hannity was having a full-blown psycho-emotional breakdown on Fox News about AOC's billionaire comments. Now, without further ado, I present to you Sean Hannity having a breakdown.
The world is going to end in 12 years if we don't address climate change. And your biggest issue is how are we going to pay for it? And this is the war. This is our World War II.
You better make that bucket list. 12 years, that's all we got left. And she recently called the American dream, she actually called it immoral. Called for oppressive taxes on private businesses and wealthy individuals. Oh, the top 20% of Americans pay almost all of the taxes already. And she actively supports the nationalization of the healthcare industry, the energy industry, just like Venezuela. And recently bashing Americans.
Pause it. I'm going to change my Twitter handle to just like Venezuela.
Just like Venezuela.
Just like Venezuela.
Well, that's already in AOC's bio.
Oh yeah, right. That's actually the, you know how they release like those boring like campaign books? That should be her book. It's like she's like in front of American flags.
She's like,
just like Venezuela.
Healthcare policy. See Venezuela.
See Venezuela.
The energy industry, just like Venezuela. And recently bashing Americans who are, quote, living in excess. I thought that was the American dream. Take a look.
So after you make $10 million in 1 year, your dollars after that start to get progressively taxed at a much higher rate. And really what that is that it's the tax interpretation of one answer to the question of how much is at what level are we really just living in excess, and what kind of society do we want to live in?
So let's empower the government to confiscate it all. You better hide your nice things, because here come the excess police. Speaking of which, the Congresswoman's new policy advisor changed his Twitter handle to, quote, every billionaire is a policy failure. Wow. He even vowed to convince his boss that a 70% top tax rate is too low, and he would talk her up to 90%.
Exactly.
After state taxes, nobody's going to work. In the twisted world of what is now the radical Socialist Democratic Party, apparently making money and being successful is evil. But Venezuela is a heaven-on-earth opportunity for us.
Right.
We recently sent our Fox News contributor, Lawrence Jones, to Ocasio-Cortez's district to see what her constituents actually think about these socialist fantasies. Let's take a look.
She believes we should tax the rich 70%. So 70% of what they make should go back to Uncle Sam. Okay. Do you agree with her?
Sure, why not?
I am all for it.
Too low. Too low. So what would you suggest?
90%.
Absolutely. They make so much money. Yeah. Tax them.
70% nationally, 10% New York, 4% city, then add property sales taxes, and you get to keep nothing.
I would say in Sean Kennedy's case, he literally should get to keep nothing. I want a complete abolition of homelessness, except for a little bit of homeless time for Sean Hannity.
Yeah, we'll make an exception.
Yeah, it would do him some good.
I mean, what does Sean pull in a year? 20 million?
20 mil.
So that second 10 million.
Yeah, that's second 10 million.
Only
after
getting 3 of it.
It's going to be a lot less valuable. Yeah, that might actually put him in some trouble.
Yeah.
I don't know how responsibly he's spending this stuff.
That's true. Well, I mean, apparently he's living in excess. But I think, look, I mean, I don't know how. What's so funny is it's like they clearly that segment idea, the ideal is you go to her neighborhood and a bunch of people are like, that's crazy because my dream is one day I'll be Steve Jobs or some other nonsense, right? But then when you encounter like real people who are like, yeah, of course, I'm not a demented lunatic. Obviously, there should be higher tax rates on above 10 million a year.
Yeah, but they're New Yorkers.
Well, no,
So
that was what I was
they're
like.
menacing to the
right,
people
that
who
was the
watch
thing.
Fox.
It was like, well, yeah, just you know what? Put that sassy Latina on there, and then that'll like the ideal is what you have is someone who would be like, I'm surprised they didn't pay somebody to be like, I came from Venezuela for freedom, man. But that's just amazing because the whole dynamic. We've talked about this for a long time, but the whole dynamic for so long has been Sean Hannity basically doing the same segment when Obama's like, what I think you should have is a graded healthcare pay scale, which would be a tax subsidy, which could be taxed on a surcharge on every third private jet flight. And he's been going like, that's socialism, like having these conniptions about these profoundly modest centrist initiatives that people like Obama have put forward, which are really hard to explain. So they're easier to terrify people about. And they also usually do come with a lot of annoying catches, like you're forced to buy private health insurance, and then you have to deal with the subsidy system. It's better than nothing, but it sucks because private health insurance sucks. Then when you're confronted with, yeah, well, what about we just tax useless people like Sean Hannity and give everybody Medicare? The thing is actually happening, so the freak out is that much more intense. And then you encounter reality, and most sane people are like, right, of course.
Yeah, every single time they put her on Fox News and try to make her policies look bad. Like, I don't know if it's that somebody sympathetic is working there or her policies are just impossible to make look bad to the majority of people who aren't super wealthy. But people who watch Fox understand top marginal tax rates a little bit better.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is apparently, and everybody should follow him. This is at Dan Riffle. He is policy for AOC. He's the Every Billionaire Policy Failure. And he tweeted out, in most other offices for most other members, I have been shit canned on the spot for that Hannity segment last night. I'm grateful that I work in the very best office for the very best member. And then he has a link to to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's tweet. They're so good at this. So she tweeted, tempted to frame this and put it on my desk with a laughing emoji at the Hannity segment. And the Hannity segment says, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's policy guy, every billionaire is a policy failure.
You know how we talk
which
about
of course it is.
The right is basically just interested in owning the libs?
Yes.
It is a lot of fun to just own people.
It is.
Yeah. And they have no idea how to own someone like this.
No, especially that screenshot of Sean Hannity.
Because when you talk about specific policies and you talk about economics, like it's a lot harder to do the SJW red baiting cultural Marxism shit.
Yes, you're on better terrain when you're talking about giving people health care than debating somebody's stand-up set. What did you say? He's calling in now? Is that Sam?
Can you hear me? Yes.
Be careful. I've heard that there is a lavender outbreak in Brooklyn, Sam.
Thank you, Michael.
You're welcome.
That's good stuff.
Yeah, everybody else.
I really enjoyed watching Sean Hannity. First of all, the idea of Sean Hannity making $0 is very appealing to me. But Sean Hannity, more like over the years, I have seen this guy just blatantly lie in a way that he knows what the truth is, right? Like, I mean, there's tiny things that I have seen over the years that he has done that have impressed me because I'm so aware that he knows the truth of what he's saying. Like that moment where he talked about, between city taxes and state taxes, you'll get $0.
Zero.
I mean, he knows that he will make exactly what he's making today up in his first $10 million. And then after the $10 million, it will be largely gone. And he knows that, but he lies to his audience. The one time I remember seeing him do that before was years ago when he would talk about Bill Clinton and Monica Lewinsky. And he kept getting Monica Lewinsky's age wrong. And like he clearly knew, but he kept saying like she was 19. Wow. And you know, it's not a big deal, but it was like I heard someone correct him on the air, and he continued to do it day after day after that. And I was just like, that the guy knows he's lying. Like he's not, you know, it's not like he's coming up with a fact or a figure that one makes a mistake on.
Right.
He knows he's lying and he justifies it. That's always what I found disturbing about Hannity. Fortunately, he lacked the talent to be as destructive as he could have. Now, of course, he's the senior advisor to Donald Trump.
Right.
So
I was going to say he's one of the most important policymakers / propagandists in the world today.
All right, look, I'm going to call back in with just one other device.
Okay.
Give me 1 second. I'll be
All right, call right back.
Okay.
All right. Oh, this is good news. And clearly this is more in the space that's being created by this AOC conversation. And by the way, Josh from Chicago was right. I mean, look, I think Bernie's going to run, and I'm obviously very eager, but I 100%, as of now, as has been said from the beginning, Elizabeth Warren's definitely the best candidate so far in the race. And this is a good example of it. She's proposing a wealth tax on those with more than $50 million in an attempt to combat soaring income inequality. The tax would hit those above $50 million with a 2% wealth tax. Should be higher, but
modest,
whatever.
yeah.
Super modest. And those above $1 billion with a 3% wealth tax. I mean, I would obviously at the very least throw both of those numbers up at least into double digits.
Yep.
But that's great.
Yep.
Great. And that's how the terrain shifts. And that's also really how, I mean, again, I think someone like Kamala Harris is frankly going to be savvier, but that was why that exchange with Gillibrand yesterday was so beautiful, because it was like, all right, well, now, you know, cool. You've been voting the right way on Trump nominees. You've been embracing all these great policies. The main institutional mechanism that's going to block a Green New Deal, Medicare for all, free college, all these things, which apparently you're now all of a sudden strongly support, is getting rid of the filibuster if we're in power. What say you? And she says nothing. And, you know, and I think there's another thing. I want to know, hey, Kamala, what do you think about a wealth tax? You know, hey, Corey, the baby bonds thing is a cool idea. Actually, if you crunch the numbers, it doesn't really generate that much money. This would do something. What do you think about that? What do you think about, you know, a wealth tax on all of your hedge fund buddies?
It's also just nice to get more ideas into the space.
You know, more ideas.
We just need more and more ideas because we can get too focused on things like income tax, which obviously needs to be raised.
But you also need to target. No, but it's actually really true. You need to target wealth itself.
Exactly.
I mean, in a certain way, even like, of course, if you're making more than a couple $1 million a year, obviously 90%, no doubt. But even just the broader principle that like any form of wealth that's just sitting there as distinct from money you're generating actually should really be talked about.
If you want capitalists to have less power, start taxing capital.
Precisely.
Yeah. Capital gains used to be taxed at a rate more in line with people's wage labor, and that's been rolled way back.
That's insane that it's not like way higher.
It should be much higher.
Right, it should be the exact.
You didn't work for that money.
No, precisely. And that so there's even something to be said. Again, there's no contradiction. But just even having like a conversation, like, yes, the wealth in it itself, because we need to start doing things like certain forms of wealth just needs to be like 100% and way jacked up. Sam is back.
I don't know that there's ever been a wealth tax in this country.
No.
I mean, the closest thing would be an estate tax,
right,
where wealth is taxed, but it's done upon a transfer. So it's I don't know that we've ever had a wealth tax in this country.
Well, it's the difference between talking about poverty and talking about inequality, right? I think this is going to be one very clarifying split within the Democratic Party, because wealthy liberals are fine with talking about fighting poverty and bringing up the floor for the poorest people. But when you draw the connection between the people who have the most and the existence of an economic underclass, and you start talking about fighting inequality and the relationship between those things, that's where some people get off the train.
Mm-hmm.
I also think that you know, I don't know that you want to. I do think that there's value in creating incentives with certain things to do with your money, the wealth that you have. I mean, I think the key thing in terms of capital gains to me would be to have a have multiple tiers of what the value of capital is. I mean, I think like the idea that in some respect the stock market should be taxed at the same rate as if you invest in a piece of machinery is just absurd to me, and sell that machinery or something. I mean, I think like so I mean, I think we could have different tiers of capital gains, but if you tier those in the proper way, then at the very least, the wealth that you do not claw back that has already been accumulated, you can simply say, like, you're just not going to be able to make as much if you hoard that money. You're going to actually have to legitimately plow it back into society, as opposed to just sort of putting it in vehicles that don't help anybody. I mean, it just does not really help anybody when a billionaire, buys 50% of a controlling interest in the stocks of any given company.
Oh, I thought that was the goal. Yeah, and pretty soon there'll be nothing left. I'll just have a stick of gum.
I would buy futures in Sean Hannity making no money, though. That would be great.
That would be so awesome. As I said, I want no homelessness, but temporary homelessness for Sean Hannity.
His family would still get to live in a moderate home in London.
He can live in one of the HUD houses that he bought.
Yeah, he could live in
people for.
He could live in a HUD house in Yonkers, and he will be homeless for 6 months.
All right, I'm signing off. Hopefully,
the second one was
good.
a little bit better. I don't know why. I felt like there was a little bit less cuts in the second one for some reason. I don't know if anybody else noticed that, but
there's a little bit of sometimes I think the stream might get a bit behind, so some bits of words are getting cut off. But it's
the sound
more or less
itself
stable.
is good.
Yeah, the sound sounds good.
So the second one was actually better this time.
I thought it was. I mean, not radically.
They're pretty close.
Okay.
Everything is all messed up today.
No, it was good. It was good.
All right.
Thanks,
talk
Sam.
to you guys later.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
All right. Let's actually loop. Sorry? No, we can do it. Then we have both the Brazil-related pictures and the Venezuela stuff after. Because I want to do those. All right, but we can do Borderomo first. Yeah, and then the ones from Davos with Bolsonaro. What's the Borderomo one?
This is just more Fox freak out. This is Fox Business System.
And wait, she had on Lee Carter? Oh, I was gonna say, whoa. Lee, by the way, I just want to say, as unfortunately she has Lee Carter the Lesser on from Davos. It looks like. I just want to say that another person in all this, as we do our sort of list of shout outs of people who, Lee Carter, state assemblyman in Virginia, amazing, doing incredible work, and also an incredibly excellent Twitter presence, and also a great interview. It's already been a while now. It was like last summer, but he was on TMBS. One of the things he said in that interview that was so brilliant, too, was he was like, when I was out campaigning, I wasn't talking about getting people jobs. I was talking about getting them to be able to work less, because some people do need jobs. Of course, they need to be put in the labor market. But a lot of the people I'm talking to, they're working 2 jobs, and they don't have enough money. And they really just need to work less and get more. It's beautiful. All right. Maria Bartiromo, she's freaked out about Twitter. She's freaked out about this and that. And now with Lee Carter, I mean, there is something just amazing about literally sitting in Davos, where apparently in the span of one day, the AOC tax proposal, I think, was literally like booed at a session at Davos, right? At the same day, they also had in some type of organizational consultant do a exercise where they pretended that they were refugees, and they crawled on the floor and got into the experiential space of,
kill me.
Right. So this is actually still happening. This thing that, of course, should be absolutely thrown into the trash heap of history, which actually, ironically, it already is. We're just still wasting money on it. This is Maria Bartiromo. She's in Davos with Lee Carter the Lesser, and they're bitching. And actually, well, maybe I should say, maybe not. Maybe he'll turn out to be cool, though I doubt it. Oh, yeah, it's definitely Lee Carter the Lesser. Okay, Lee Carter the Lesser is a Republican pollster, I believe, and they are going to all have another conniption about AOC.
Well, when you're speaking about money, I mean, AOC had the idea to tax Anyone with $10 million at 70%. Do you think that's going to go over? How does that go over?
So it goes over well with a segment of the Democratic base, and we actually have a new poll that shows most Democrats would be willing to vote for her, or to consider voting for her for president if she was old enough. Obviously, she isn't.
For president?
For president. And we actually have a second poll that's coming out later this week that asks people how they view the idea of socialism. And young Democrats actually view socialism a little bit more positively than they view capitalism. So this is there's a segment of the population for which this is, the right direction to take things.
This is really interesting, Lee Carter. What do you see from your dials in talking to people about socialism versus capitalism?
What I've got to say is that if we dismiss Ocasio-Cortez and socialism right now, it's at our own peril. It's very much like what happened in 2015 when people are dismissive of Donald Trump coming in, saying that his policies were overly simplistic, that they were missing and lacking substance, that they wanted something deeper, and they outright dismissed him. I think that people who are dismissing this as something that's short-sighted absolutely aren't getting why people are rallying around her and around these policies. There's a lot of hopelessness out there. There's a lot of people who want a better life, and this sounds like an easy way for them, a quick fix, and something that sounds like a different, new way of doing things. And I think that if people want to win against this, they're going to have to take it seriously and understand why it is that so many people are gravitating towards these policies and to her.
Or explain the effect of socialism. Explain the effect of socialism versus capitalism.
Well, Marie, I want to point that out. The great liberal lie that the people in the Republican Party need to push back on is that somehow the rich are rich enough to fund all these grand spending plans by these socialists and by these people on the far left. They're not.
They most certainly are. Read each year's Oxfam report on the ever shrinking number of 25 people owning more than most people on Earth, as an example. I don't usually go in for this type of thing as much, but hat tip to Jamie and clapping hands emoji. We're not liberals. You said it yourself. We're socialists, and we don't want to just tax it. We want to take all your shit. So, yeah. But what is astonishing about that, and actually, she's still Lee Carter the lesser, but she's sort of okay, as particularly if you're a Republican, you should be listening to her strategic advice. Although I don't know how you circle that square. But that being said, what is funny about it is there's no doubt that, especially in the center, not in the periphery, but in a place like the United States, if these people in the oligarchy class had come together and actually said, you know what, we get it. There needs to be some form of public health care. There needs to be some provision so people don't graduate into a completely depressed job market. There needs to be some sense of continued mobility, at least for the sections of essentially the white population that have always expected it. The extreme poverties and repression we need to continue to push into the peripheries of race and geography and class. You would probably not, I'd like to think otherwise, but you probably would still have a lot of people who would be, I think, a bit more to the left and hopefully a bit more socially progressive if they're oriented towards the Democrats. But there wouldn't be a socialism conversation if they weren't so pathologically predatory and committed to stealing every single last bit. And I think one of the interesting things right now in a beef inside the elite is I think that there are some members of the elite. If I'm George Soros, who I'll give credit for, George Soros is a liberal, and George Soros understands that there's an element of luck to his life, and he understands there needs to be a social safety net. But if he sat down with his fellow oligarchs, it would be him and Warren Buffett talking to the Kochs and the Mercers and being like, you motherfucking morons. We literally were getting away with having multiple homes and being billionaires, which no matter how good a person you are, just shouldn't exist. It's incompatible with life on Earth and democracy. But we were getting away with it. We could fly anywhere we wanted on the planet. We didn't even need to carry our passports with us. We could influence any government we wanted. And all we needed to do was keep people in the dominant, parts of society continue to be able to rise into the middle class. We needed to up the ceiling for everybody, and we needed to be seen as basically decent, non-pernicious people. But you fucking idiots needed to steal every single crime. You'd sit down in your 15th home and think about how you could take Head Start out of a kid's mouth, and now they're looking at socialism. Fuck you.
Yeah. That's how we got the New Deal.
Right.
It was a compromise.
Definitely.
To save capitalism, basically. And FDR got all the captains of industry on board with it, even though
Not
some
all.
of them were not.
Some of them considered
Well,
having
yes,
a coup
some
against
of them were
him.
not.
A lot of them weren't.
But, you
Yeah.
know, eventually
He got the
managed
sensible
to
ones.
get
He got
he got the sensible ones.
Right.
He got the deal through. And the sensible ones knew that, you know, they might get their throats slit in the night if they didn't do this. And, you know, I think we have a lot in common now with the 1930s, more so than the last tumultuous times, right, in the 60s. I think the new left of today, the left of today has more in common with the old left of the 30s than the new left of the 60s. And they need to pay attention.
No doubt. Speaking of Davos, for fresh viewers, this was so good. We did this on TMBS. We need to do this on Majority Report. It's so good because Anand Giridharadas, I was doing that better before.
Giridharadas.
You know what the problem is? Actually, somebody who really does know these pronunciations corrected me, and I have the really right one in my head, which I'm totally failing at. But anyways, he wrote a book. What is it? What is the name of his book again?
I think it's Winners Take All.
Winners Take All. He is a very smart, persistent critic of the Davos class, of our style of capitalism, and because of his pedigree and his connections, he's invited to participate in forums like Bloomberg or Davos, where he humiliates people. And in this case, he's going to turn Tony Blair, who is one of the worst people on planet Earth. The fact that Lula is in jail and Tony Blair is free is the distillation of the sickness of our times. He is a where to start with guy, but you could leave it, frankly, if you want. Helped lie UK into the invasion of Iraq, was a co-architect of that, and has spent his post-premiership lobbying for Central Asian, Middle Eastern. Just doing some of the most immoral, oil-based profiteering imaginable, in addition to the J.P. Morgan work. And for the last couple of years has been a persistent irritant and pest to undermine Jeremy Corbyn and Labour. And we're not done on him yet. But first, here he is responding through the conduit of Christiane Amanpour to a very sensible question from Anand Giridharadas about why do we even have Davos anymore? And it's going to turn this sort of smiling, tight-jawed sociopath into a gibbering mess.
Let me just play you this little soundbite from a guy who's kind of gone viral right now, Anand Giridharadas, who's just written this book, Winner Takes All, the charade of the global elites. Look what he just told me.
I think Davos should end. I think it should be canceled this year and should end going forward. It is a family reunion for the people who, in my view, broke the modern world.
I mean, you can't argue with that, right?
I can. Look.
I can.
It's the easiest line in the world to make, by the way. I tell you what I do when I come to Davos. So later today, I'll be meeting 3 of my presidents from Africa. I don't think they broke.
I do want to note my presidents from Africa.
Very similar to.
I won't belabor it.
What does he mean?
My
by
African American.
My African Americans.
My African presidents.
I would be meeting with my African presidents.
But what could he possibly mean?
They're clients of his consulting practice. He has a.
So he calls them my. Okay.
Yeah, he has a governance project in Africa where he teaches deliverology.
By the way, I tell you what I do when I come to Davos. So later today, I'll be meeting 3 of my presidents from Africa. I don't think they broke the economic system. I'll be meeting a whole lot of people from multilateral institutions who work in the developing world. I'm here because my institute, which is a not-for-profit institute, works in some of the poorest parts of the world trying to help them. And, to be fair, the people who come here, they're discussing serious issues. So it's the easiest play in the world. Say, all these people are coming along here, the global elite and so on. And by the way, these arguments about cultural identity and nationalism, in my experience, you've got elites on either side of the argument. So, Davos, it is what it is. It's an opportunity for people to come and network on issues of importance. And, some people may come here who are billionaires from different parts of the world, but other people come because some of the issues that they're discussing here are important.
Because they were invited by the billionaires to discuss those issues. Let me just say this. First of all, the part I like is, it is what it is. If I'm lobbying for the Kazakhs or fucking Rupert Murdoch's wife in a hot tub while he's away, which is, by the way, if those reports are true, by far the coolest thing Tony Blair has ever done. It is what it is. And let me just add a few more cheap shots on top of that. Tony Blair is a war criminal, sociopath, and should be banned from media. We have one more Tony Blair thing to get to, but first, I believe, is there a return here? Is Sam back on the line again? Sam, are you there?
Yeah, I'm trying just one more. Yes, I am here.
Hello?
Can you hear me?
Yes. Electrifying
Can you hear me?
radio. Do you see?
You call yourself a leftist, and yet you're calling us on
can
a
you hear me?
phone.
Yeah, we hear you.
Can you
Yeah, we hear
reconcile
you.
that?
We hear you.
Can you? Okay.
Yeah. Been hearing you apathetically
Yeah,
steamrolling over the show.
One of the best things. Sorry about that.
No problem.
One of the
Just
best
kidding. Go ahead.
pieces I think I've ever read was on Davos was by Chris Hayes, and that's worth checking out.
When did it come out?
He wrote it years ago about the fractal inequality.
Oh, that's actually, it's a good Tony Blair anecdote, because I remember there was a piece that came out about Blair about a year ago, and it was like Tony Blair charted his own yacht in Italy, and his whole career had been built on, like, it was always like, hey, he's on some oligarch or some movie star's yacht, like, who's he currying favor with this week? And the article was like, his consulting practices and PR advice for, like, Kazakhstan has gotten so lucrative that he can get his own yacht now. And so he feels like less resentful of all of the elites he's around, in terms of, because that is his experience of that fractal inequality.
Yeah, that's important.
Yeah.
That's very important.
Yeah.
All right, Michael, listen to me. Can you count to 5 for me? Because I think there might be a big latency problem with this version that I'm using right now.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
2, 3, 4.
Oh, huge delay.
5.
Huge
Yeah,
delay.
you started when he got to 5.
Yeah, that was not good. Big
All
delay.
right. Wow. Okay. All right. Thanks. We'll try something different.
Okay.
Bye, guys.
Bye, Sam. I don't know what happened that time.
TTYL.
Yeah, that was crazy. All right, we got to get to this now. So, Tony Blair, let's continue on him for a second. This guy, who, don't forget, this was the darling until he became. I mean, he's become so odious in the past couple of years that even sort of respectable Democrats don't want to be seen with him, although he still provided advice to Hillary Clinton over the phone in her campaign. But Tony Blair, who has, and now is starting to rebrand himself, because for a couple of years it was like, oh, he's the one advising the Saudis and the Kuwaitis and the Kazakhstan and the Kazakh government. He's, just purely running a cash business and influence peddling off of his position in a way that was even unprecedented in modern UK politics. In the past couple of years, he's come back, and now he has this open institute in the UK, and he's, back to, I'm high-minded, and I'm trying to stop Brexit, and blah, 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 blah. And in this process, he still has almost a total inability to criticize Donald Trump. And he is constantly undermining Jeremy Corbyn. Now, if you wanted to say, hey, you know what, he has that American allegiance thing, he doesn't want to lay into Trump, sure, although he's laid into Bernie. But then there's another weird question here. There was even a story that in the beginning of the administration that Tony Blair was lobbying Jared Kushner to bring him back into the Middle East peace process, which was his total fail. If you recall, when he left office, he was head of the quartet, which was as Middle East peace envoy, which he apparently mostly used to run interference for Israel and pressure to Palestinians to accept deals on behalf of corporate clients he had. It was sleazy and failed. But he's trying to brand himself as the anti-extremism guy. First of all, of course, he's going to draw a total insane equivalency, as many centrists do, between a Corbyn and a Trump, which is self-negating in and of itself. But even taken on his own terms. First, you have the report of an outreach to Trump. Then a couple of months ago, there was a photo of Tony Blair with Salvini, the fascist deputy prime minister, xenophobe in Italy. Apparently, they were meeting because Blair was lobbying him on an oil pipeline or a natural gas pipeline. And now in Davos, and I got to say, like, Tony Blair said at the time when Lula was president, he called Lula one of the most extraordinary leaders of the modern world. This is Tony Blair with Jair Bolsonaro, who, again, let's even just stipulate, of course, Tony Blair's on board with the looting of Brazil for Wall Street and austerity and the destruction of all of the gains of Lula and the Workers' Party. But he is still theoretically a voice against extremism and for things like gay rights. That was one of his big things. He was on the cover of a gay lifestyle magazine in the UK a couple years ago because, he was good on those issues. He's posing with probably now the most, certainly inside this hemisphere, the most globally recognized anti-LGBTQ leader on the planet. And a guy who on a daily basis now we have revelations of his family's connection to a mafia cartel that assassinated one of the most promising leaders, in this case, an Afro-Brazilian lesbian in the world. Tony Blair should be expelled from the Labor Party. He should never be invited on any show or outlet besides, I guess, Bloomberg or Breitbart. And we should learn, frankly, from the British, who loathe this guy, and people are constantly protesting him and trying to make citizens arrests. And we should apply that same spirit to everybody in the Trump administration, everybody in the Republican leadership, and a whole host of leaders. And maybe Hillary Clinton for backing the coup in Honduras. Fuck Tony Blair.
Yeah. Talk about fake friends.
That's unbelievable. It's disgusting.
This is going. We're going to keep seeing this though as things become more polarized worldwide, and there are fewer and fewer examples of viable centrist candidates. Right? The people who've been trying to paint themselves as these reasonable centrists when they're actually like free market fascists who are socially liberal in the context of the societies in which they live. They're always going to break for the right. Always.
No doubt. Speaking of always breaking for the right, remember, look, we're all slaves in a metaphorical sense. I actually want to be more careful about the use of that word. But anyways, a lot of us are caught inside the Apple matrix. And anybody who's informed obviously knows that Apple's an incredibly problematic company in and of itself. And then, of course, just the monopoly power and influence that Apple represents, along with Google and Facebook, are pernicious and problematic in and of itself. But this is a good example of somebody who, especially a couple of years ago, Tim Cook, credit where credit's due, it's historic. He's the first openly gay man to run a Fortune 500 company. And that is specifically relevant in this case because let's be clear here. Tim Cook is quite public on calling for deregulation and allowing Apple to get away with dodging and stealing tax money from the Treasury, which is another major cause. Talk about the money that Fox supposedly thinks we can't find. It could seize their Irish tax shelter alone would do a beautiful dent in dealing with hunger in this country. So Tim Cook, major problem as a company and as a guy. But that being said, he's spoken eloquently. You can hear him in interviews quite eloquently speaking about his experience as a gay man. It even had, and of course, look, the reason they deplatformed Alex Jones is because of no ethical commitment. It was just too much heat. But that being said, flowing from that, this is also a guy who did the only sort of overt political stand. He's contributed to Republicans and Democrats. But he deplatformed Alex Jones, supposedly because that was beyond the pale. Now, what if you had a head of state who was both virulently homophobic? He said he'd prefer his own son be hit by a car than be gay. And who had advisors who promote conspiracy theories like cultural Marxism, which are indistinguishable from Alex Jones. In fact, one of his advisors is an English-speaking astrologer living in Virginia. This is one of the prime intellectual architects of Bolsonaro. And no hate on astrologers, but hate on fascist quasi-mystics, which this guy is. You might think if you were Tim Cook, maybe at the very least, I shouldn't dine with and be photographed with Jair Bolsonaro. But of course, if you're savvy and you watch this show, you know better. And here is
Bolsonaro.
I'm sure Tim Cook could pronounce the name. This is Tim Cook dining with Jair Bolsonaro in Brazil. Disgusting. And I do have to say, though, it's funny because if you follow Lula's Instagram and Twitter accounts, like, Bolsonaro got panned for his speech by even just like the mainstream press because it was just, he's not a good speaker and it was uninspired. And also, he's going there and saying Brazil's open for business and we're fighting corruption while his family and administration are just being engulfed in wild, extreme corruption stories. So it doesn't really work. But just on like a level of just political skills and dignity of representing your country, I think that was one of the things that Dave said about like putting Brazil back on the map. These clips of Lula just owning the room, like walking in and Obama's like, oh, fuck, like there's Lula. Or, I don't know why I made him sound like Bill Clinton, but like everybody is basically thirsting to get into a photo with Lula. And apparently the only person really thirsting to get into a photo with Bolsonaro was Tony Blair. So
Satya Nadella, the CEO of Microsoft, was also seated at that table. I don't think he's pictured there.
I don't see it. But
he was reportedly across from them.
It's a big one. It's also less commented upon, and I know a little bit less about it. But one of the things that actually the Workers' Party did do is they were pretty good on supporting things like Linux and open software computing. So I'm seeing so I would assume, as with all the other areas ripe for privatization and theft, the tech companies are excited about what they can do to commandeer commons in Brazil under the fascist leadership of Jair Bolsonaro. All right, we need to get to this one more segment, and then we got to wrap up really soon, but this is important. Let's just do these tweets. There's a coup ongoing in Venezuela. I think we outlined it with Eva Golinger. If you didn't see that part of the show, go watch it. It's really important. All conversations about the nature of the Maduro government are secondary as soon as the U.S. puts a coup into motion. We need to oppose it, and this is a test of left-wing leadership. So let's just start with, just one of the great mediocrities of the Senate. And just bear in mind, first of all, that a lot of people in the Democratic Party are co-signing on this coup. Elliot Engel, Susan Shalala, and many others in Congress, including actually introducing legislation to put this forward. And again, not a position which you could track separate from a coup. The coup needs to be opposed 100%, but there's no doubt you could follow a Mexican or even French or Spanish model and say there needs to be some type of negotiated settlement. So they're rejecting a moderate track and endorsing a Trump far-right coup. That's what these Democrats are doing. And Dick Durbin, who you will see sanctimoniously on TV whining about Russia, I'm sure, had this to say yesterday. Or, I believe this was yesterday. Last year in Venezuela, I met with now interim leader Juan Guaido and many of his talented colleagues elected to the National Assembly during my visit. They are brave patriots who see a hopeful democratic future for the Brazilian people. I plan to speak with him in a few days ahead and offer my support for his pledge to lead a thoughtful, peaceful transition to a legitimate election that meets international standards in the immediate future. My full statement on today's news. Now, look, again, this guy, with the backing of regional far-right governments in Colombia and Brazil, as well as the prime corporate hegemonic interests in the region, the United States and Canada, Justin Trudeau is 100% behind this coup, has declared himself president. That's not how it works. I mean, I don't really know much more else I can spell out. And thankfully, and credit due to Ro Khanna, who really has just been exceptional in this regard. We still need to hear something from Bernie Sanders. We still need to, I'd certainly like to hear something. I mean, look, Bernie Sanders, I want to hear something from, and I will critique him if I don't. But we've already spelled out all the ways in which Bernie has on Israel-Palestine, on Brazil, on global fascism. Bernie's been there. This would be a great opportunity for somebody to finally put some substance behind Tulsi Gabbard's supposed opposition to U.S. hegemonic interference. I haven't heard anything from her yet. What I've seen is, as of this, Ilhan Omar and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez have retweeted, and that's fine. I guess they've signal boosted, although they all need to be getting together and coming up with a statement and an action on this to stop a coup and a potential even invasion. But Ro Khanna has taken the lead and really immense credit to Ro Khanna. I mean, he's really distinguishing himself here. With respect, Senator Durbin, the U.S. should not anoint the leader of the opposition in Venezuela during an internal polarized conflict. Let us support Uruguay, Mexico, and the Vatican's efforts for a negotiated settlement and end sanctions that are making hyperinflation worse. Done. I mean, we'll add the other, and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez retweeted this. So did Ilhan Omar. And then, and Ro Khanna also said this yesterday. And it's really funny. He's quote tweeting Rania Khalek. So it's interesting. I mean, it's a really different dynamic where you could see the types of media, just even that these, the comms people are probably watching shows like this and reading different media. That's significant. Ro Khanna, let me get this straight. The U.S. is sanctioning Venezuela for their lack of democracy, but not Saudi Arabia. Such hypocrisy. Maduro's policies are bad and not helping his people, but crippling sanctions or pushing for regime change will only make the situation worse. I mean, look, that's it. One should study and explore more deeply what's happening there, but those are the positions to have. They're the only positions to have. And you should hear that, frankly, not just from progressives, but really any Democrat. And I mean, of course, I'll just add for the hell of it to the list. I mean, Rand Paul, who's supposedly Mr. Anti-Intervention. I'd like to hear something there. All right. We only
P.S. Justin Trudeau does not get to be our woke bae anymore if he's going to support right-wing coups.
I don't think he ever was.
Yeah.
But
well, he was some people's woke bae, right?
I think for the people who he was woke bae of, they're not going to care about this.
Don't pretend
that's the truth.
that you're a woke bae at home if you're going to support right-wing coups abroad. And that goes for all Democrats as well.
That's the shame is I feel like I don't know. I don't know how durable he is compared to Macron, but
Macron's a lot smarter.
Yeah.
All right, last call of the day.
It doesn't show in the polls, though.
No, but there's just structural forces that it's like, you can be as smart as you want. Don't try to take away French people's right to be lazy fuckers. All right, last call from Much Love to France. Liberty, equality, la 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 la. All right, last call of the day. You're calling from a 610 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Hey, is this me?
Yes, this is you. With the last call of the day, got to be very quick, my friends. Yes, what's on your mind?
Okay, hey, Mike. I just was wondering if you guys would talk about, like, the dynamic that Democrats can be hurt sometimes by kind of low expectations in terms of the 2020 race, because just talking to people, I've encountered a lot of people who just are concerned with policy, but pretty much are willing to support anybody in the primary, and they're less concerned with policy even than they were in 2016.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if that will hurt Bernie, because a lot of Democrats who even like AOC will still like an establishment figure like Joe Biden, and it's kind of a interesting dynamic.
Well, I want to say, I think specifically with AOC, that's a good thing about AOC, which is that right now everybody likes her. Now, that's going to change because, as an example, if it comes down to Kamala Harris and Bernie Sanders, she's going to need to endorse Bernie Sanders, in my view. And that's where the rubber is, because that's her politics. That's, that's the commitment. There's a clear choice there, and the rubber will hit the road, and some of the people who kind of generically just like certain things stylistically are going to, freak out. But that being said, I actually think that twofold, my view is one is actually, and this is why, because I think right now the polling is we can have this debate more, but I think the polling shows that most any Democrat is poised to probably beat Donald Trump. So take that as an opportunity to vote for what you actually want, which is actual real reform, real change, and real durable contributions, which leads to the second point, which is, for the past several decades, Republicans come in through combinations of thievery, intimidation, racism, discrimination. They take in power, then they fuck everything up because at the end of the day, unless you're an oligarch, this stuff does not benefit you. And there's only so many people. It's a chunk of people, but it's not a majority who will vote for you purely just based off of the cultural, racial, gender resentments. And so then they lose. And then a Democrat gets into power, and the Democrat... And I understand there's a lot of subtleties to this, blah, 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 blah. But as a basic premise, the Democrats, Clinton and Obama, tinker in and work within the parameters that were set by the Republican Party. Then the fundamental dynamics do not shift, and you still have the profound prejudices that they can tap into. So the second part of the argument is, and that's why I think it's you need to expand it beyond 2020. I think Trump very well will lose to anybody. But my question is, what happens in 2024? If you don't start to actually implement some of these things and deal with these massive disparities, inequalities, the ecological crisis, you're going to keep having these resurgent cycles of far-right politics. And it's already been shown that the center, even at its most enlightened and effective, and when it's not past its sell-by date, has not been able to reset the parameters. Like, Jonathan Chait writes these silly columns every couple of weeks where he's like, everybody says they want a Green New Deal and universal health care. Obama already did it. Yeah. And it's like, well, dude, you know what?
Jesus Christ.
Yeah, I guess so. Like if you want you and a couple of other nerds being like, well, actually, the stimulus, the Affordable Care Act. But in terms of reality and in terms of a vast majority of people's lived experiences, those were, in those cases, positive reforms, which are to Obama's credit. But they ain't dealt with transitioning the energy economy and getting everybody no bullshit full healthcare and dealing with the terrorism of healthcare companies. So I would also say to them, where do you want to be in 2024? Like, vote for what you actually want in terms of real reforms. And then don't you want somebody who's going to govern with a mindset of resetting the power dynamics of the country? And I think that even center-left people can understand that on some level. Because do you really want, do you want 24 years of middling along, 4 years of middling along, and then in 2024, all of a sudden fucking Tom Cotton is a legitimate contender? I mean, Jesus fucking Christ. Don't we want to X these people out? We got to do what Thatcher and Reagan did. They reset the template. And I'm only interested in candidates that are committing to reset the template.
And one more thing. When is your book on the IDW?
It's coming out in the summer.
Out,
Coming out in the summer. Have more info on it soon. Thanks for the call, brother. Sorry, couldn't get to everybody. Apologies. We are going way late. Final IM of the day. Thames Darwin. Michael, you need to clip that minute or two where you and Jamie riff on how billionaires want to end Head Start to garner their $15 billion and how they should go fuck themselves. I need it on a loop. Yeah, that was pretty good. All right. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you tomorrow.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want.